9-year-old boy with bruised hands brought her unconscious little sister to a pharmacy at dawn. When the pharmacist asked what happened, the child's explanation about their stepfather's medicine made her lock the doors and call 911. Lucas Mitchell had been counting days since Richard moved in. 183. Almost half a year of holding his breath, of watching shadows stretch longer across the walls of what used to be home. He sat now on the edge of his narrow bed, his school backpack between his feet, listening to the sounds of the house waking up around him. 6:30 in the morning, and already he felt tired. Through the thin wall, he could hear his little sister's voice. Madeline was talking to her stuffed rabbit again, a quiet murmur that used to bubble with invented stories and giggles. Now her voice was flat, the words indistinct. Lucas frowned, rubbing at a bruise on his wrist. He'd gotten it 2 days ago, when Richard had grabbed him for getting in the way, while he was helping Madeline get ready for bed. "Lucas," his mother's voice drifted up the stairs. "Honey, you need to get moving or you'll miss the bus." He shouldered his backpack, its weight familiar and comforting, and padded down the hallway to peek into his sister's room. Madeline sat on her rumpled bed, still in her pajamas, her blonde curls tangled around her face. She was only 4, but something about her eyes seemed older, wary in a way that made Lucas's chest hurt. "Hey, Maddie," he said softly. "Time for breakfast." She looked up at him, blinking slowly, as if it took effort to focus. "Lucas," she said, her small voice raspy. "Mr. Hoppy can't find his voice today." Lucas glanced at the well-worn rabbit clutched in her hands. "Maybe he's just tired. Mom's making toast. Want me to help you get dressed?" Madeline nodded, sliding off the bed with a clumsiness that wasn't like her. Lucas noticed the way she wobbled slightly, catching herself on the edge of her little table. It was happening more often lately, this strange morning drowsiness that sometimes lasted until noon. Each time, Richard would explain to their mother that Madeline had experienced night terrors, and he'd had to give her some of his special medicine to help her sleep. Lucas knew about night terrors. He'd had them himself after their dad left 3 years ago. But Madeline's didn't look like that. She never screamed or cried out. She just grew quieter, disappeared a little more each day, like a drawing left too long in the sun. He helped her into a purple dress and leggings, noticing another small bruise on her upper arm. When he asked about it, Madeline just shrugged and said, "I bumped." Downstairs, the kitchen was bright with morning light streaming through the windows of their small colonial house on Maple Street. Oak Ridge, Connecticut was the kind of town that appeared on postcards. Neat rows of historic homes, tree-lined streets, and a downtown district of brick buildings where everyone seemed to know everyone else's business. It was safe, their mother always said. A good place to raise children. Elaine Mitchell stood at the counter, spreading peanut butter on toast. Her nurse's scrubs already on, though she wouldn't leave for her shift at Oak Ridge Memorial until late afternoon. At 34, she carried the permanent shadows of exhaustion beneath her eyes, but she managed to smile when she saw them. "There are my 2 favorite people," she said, placing plates on the table. "Lucas, there's lunch money on the counter. And remember, Richard will pick you up from school today for your dentist appointment." Lucas felt his stomach tighten. "I thought you were taking me. I had to switch shifts with Donna. Her son has a soccer tournament." Elaine's smile faltered at Lucas's expression. "Honey, it's been 6 months. Don't you think it's time you and Richard tried a little harder to get along?" Before Lucas could respond, the sound of heavy footsteps announced Richard's arrival. Richard Holloway was a tall man with carefully styled dark hair and the kind of smile that appeared exactly when it needed to. He wore a crisp button-down shirt and pressed slacks, the uniform of the pharmaceutical sales representative he claimed to be. "Good morning, family," he announced, dropping a kiss on Elaine's cheek. His eyes, a pale, washed-out blue, settled on Lucas with what looked like affection to anyone who wasn't paying attention. "Big guy, ready for school?" Lucas nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Richard's gaze shifted to Madeline, and his smile changed in a way that made Lucas want to step in front of his sister. "And how's my princess this morning?" Sleep well with that medicine I gave you. Madeline nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on her untouched toast. She seems really tired again, Lucas said, trying to keep his voice neutral. Maybe she needs to see Dr. Winters? Richard's smile didn't falter. Just some growing pains, buddy. Nothing to worry about. I keep telling your mom. Kids this age go through phases. He ruffled Lucas's hair with a hand that pressed just a fraction too hard. Isn't that right, Elaine? Richard's been amazing with Madeline's sleep issues, Elaine said, glancing at the kitchen clock. I don't know what we'd have done without him. Now hurry up and eat, Lucas. The bus will be here in 10 minutes. Lucas forced himself to take a bite of toast, though it felt like sawdust in his mouth. Through the kitchen window, he could see Mrs. Henderson next door hanging laundry in her backyard. He wondered what she would say if he told her about the way Richard's smile disappeared when his mother wasn't looking, or how he'd started locking the liquor cabinet, or the strange collection of pill bottles in the bathroom cabinet with their labels scratched off. Probably the same thing everyone else said. That he was being difficult, that he should be grateful his mother had found someone, that blended families took time to adjust. The bus horn sounded from the street, and Lucas grabbed his backpack. He gave his mother a quick hug and paused by Madeline's chair. See you after school, Maddie. Madeline looked up at him, her blue eyes enormous in her pale face. Will you read me a story tonight? She whispered. The one about the brave brother? Of course I will, Lucas promised. He felt Richard's eyes on him as he headed for the door. I'll see you at 3:30, sport, Richard called after him. Don't forget. Dentist. Lucas didn't look back as he hurried down the front walk. The yellow school bus waited at the curb, its doors folding open with a hydraulic sigh. As he climbed the steps, he glanced back at his house. White with green shutters, a small front porch where his mother used to sit in the evenings. It looked exactly the same as it always had, but something about it had changed, as if the windows had turned into eyes, watching and waiting. The bus lurched forward, and Lucas slid into an empty seat near the back, pressing his forehead against the cool glass of the window. As the familiar streets of Oak Ridge slipped by, he tried to shake the feeling that had been growing inside him for weeks, that something was very wrong, and no one was listening. Oak Ridge Elementary School sprawled across 2 acres of carefully maintained grounds at the edge of town. Its red brick facade and wide windows gave it a friendly appearance that Lucas had once found comforting. Now, as he made his way through the crowded hallways toward his 3rd grade classroom, he felt like a ghost drifting through a place where he no longer belonged. Mitchell. The voice belonged to Tyler Weber, a 4th grader with a crew cut and perpetually skinned knees. Hey, Mitchell. How's your new daddy treating you? Buy you any good presents lately? Lucas kept walking, his eyes fixed on the scuffed linoleum floor. Tyler and his friends had latched onto the subject of Richard with the unerring instinct of children who have found a tender spot to prod. I heard your real dad took off because you were such a baby, Tyler continued, falling into step beside him. Bet the new one will leave too once he figures it out. My dad had to move for work, Lucas muttered, the lie familiar on his tongue. The truth that his father had simply packed his things one day and disappeared was something he couldn't bring himself to say out loud, as if speaking it might make it more real. Tyler snorted. Yeah, right. Hey! He reached out to grab Lucas's backpack, but a sharp voice cut through the hallway chatter. Tyler Weber. Shouldn't you be in Mrs. Hayward's room by now? Mrs. Winters stood in the doorway of Lucas's classroom, her gray hair arranged in its usual neat bun, her expression stern behind wire-rimmed glasses. Tyler backed away, muttering under his breath, and Lucas slipped gratefully into the classroom. Good morning, Lucas, Mrs. Winters said, her voice softening. You're early today. Lucas nodded, making his way to his desk in the 3rd row. The bus came on time for once. Mrs. Winters watched him for a moment longer than necessary, her head tilted slightly to one side. Everything all right at home? You seem tired lately. For a brief, dizzying moment, Lucas considered telling her everything. About Richard's medicine. About Madeline's bruises. About the arguments he could hear late at night when his mother thought he was asleep. But the words stuck in his throat. Adults believed other adults, not children. Especially not children who had been labeled difficult and adjusting. "I'm fine," he said instead. "Just stayed up reading." Mrs. Winters smiled. "Well, I'm looking forward to your book report today. I know how much you enjoyed The Secret Garden." Lucas managed a small smile in return. He had enjoyed it, the story of children healing in a place that seemed magical after so much sadness. He'd read parts of it to Madeline, changing the words to make it simpler for her to understand. She'd loved the idea of a hidden place where no one could find them. As the classroom filled with the chatter and movement of 28 third graders, Lucas opened his notebook to a fresh page and began to write. Not his book report that was safely tucked into his folder, but a list. A record of everything he'd noticed about Madeline in the past 2 weeks. Sleeps too much, not hungry at breakfast, bruise on left arm, new. Stopped talking to mom, cried when Richard gave her bath, knocked over her milk at dinner twice, doesn't want to color anymore. He stared at the list, a cold feeling settling in his stomach. When he tried to show his mother similar notes last week, she'd sighed and told him that Madeline was just going through an adjustment period, that all children responded differently to change. But Lucas knew his sister. This wasn't adjustment. This was something else, something wrong. The morning passed in a blur of spelling tests and math worksheets. Lucas delivered his book report on autopilot, earning a smile from Mrs. Winters and a gold star sticker that felt meaningless. At lunch, he sat alone, picking at a sandwich from the cafeteria while watching the clock. Richard would be picking him up early for his dentist appointment, which meant less time at school and more time alone with his stepfather. When the office secretary called his name over the intercom at 2 o'clock, Lucas packed his things with deliberate slowness. As he passed Mrs. Winters' desk, she touched his arm lightly. "Lucas," she said quietly, "my door is always open if you need to talk. About anything. You know that, right?" He nodded, not trusting himself to speak, and headed toward the office. Through the glass doors, he could see Richard waiting, scrolling through his phone, his face arranged in the pleasant expression he wore in public. As Lucas pushed the door open, Richard looked up and smiled, slipping his phone into his pocket. "There's my boy," he said loudly enough for the secretary to hear. "Ready to get those teeth checked out?" "Yes, sir," Lucas replied automatically. The formality, another change that had crept into their household with Richard's arrival. In the parking lot, Richard's hand closed around Lucas's shoulder, steering him toward the gleaming black SUV that had replaced their old station wagon. "Change of plans, buddy," he said, his voice different now that they were alone. "We're going to swing by home first. I need to get something before your appointment." Lucas buckled his seatbelt, his pulse quickening. "What about Madeline? Doesn't she need to be picked up from preschool?" "Mrs. Grayson is dropping her off," Richard said, referring to their neighbor who sometimes helped with childcare. "She'll be home around 4. The drive home took less than 10 minutes, but to Lucas it felt much longer. Richard hummed tunelessly under his breath, occasionally glancing at Lucas with an expression that made the boy press himself closer to the passenger door. Their house sat silent and empty when they arrived, the afternoon sun casting long shadows across the front lawn. Richard unlocked the door and gestured for Lucas to enter first. "Go on up to your room and change out of your school clothes," he instructed. "Don't want to get toothpaste on your good shirt." Lucas hesitated. "I don't need to change for the dentist." Richard's smile tightened at the edges. "Did I ask what you thought? Room. Now." Lucas turned and climbed the stairs, his footsteps echoing in the quiet house. From his bedroom window, he could see Richard's SUV in the driveway, and for a wild moment he considered running, just slipping out the back door and disappearing into the woods behind their property. But there was Madeline to think about. He couldn't leave her alone. He changed slowly, listening to the sounds of Richard moving around downstairs. A cabinet opening and closing, the clink of glass, the familiar pattern of someone who thought they were alone. When Lucas finally descended the stairs in a fresh t-shirt, he found Richard in the kitchen, hunched over the counter with his back to the door. Spread out before him were several orange pill bottles, the kind Lucas had glimpsed in the bathroom cabinet, and a small electronic scale. As Lucas's sneakers squeaked on the tile floor, Richard whirled around, his face contorting with surprise and anger. "What are you doing?" he snapped, quickly sweeping the bottles into a drawer. "I told you to stay upstairs." "I changed my clothes," Lucas said, his mouth suddenly dry. "Aren't we going to be late for the dentist?" Richard stared at him for a long moment, his pale eyes calculating. Then his face smoothed out, the anger disappearing so completely it was as if Lucas had imagined it. "You're right, buddy. Let's get going. Don't want to keep the Dr. Wilson waiting." As they headed back to the car, Lucas felt Richard's hand on his shoulder again, the fingers digging in just enough to hurt. "You know," Richard said conversationally, "it's rude to sneak up on people. A man deserves his privacy in his own home." "Yes, sir," Lucas murmured. "Sorry." Richard's grip relaxed slightly. "That's my good boy. Now, after the dentist, I think we should stop for ice cream. Would you like that? We could bring some home for Madeline too. She likes that strawberry kind, right?" Lucas nodded, the familiar sick feeling returning to his stomach. This was Richard's pattern, moments of frightening anger followed by exaggerated kindness, as if he could erase what had come before. It had worked on his mother, who seemed to forget the arguments as soon as Richard appeared with flowers or suggested a family outing. But Lucas remembered everything. As they drove toward the dentist's office, Lucas stared out the window at the familiar streets of Oak Ridge, the historic town square with its white-steepled church, the row of shops along Main Street where their mother used to take them for Saturday treats, the park where he'd learned to ride a bicycle. Everything looked the same, but nothing felt right anymore. It was as if he'd woken up in a world that was almost, but not quite, his own. Richard's phone rang, and he answered it through the car's speaker system. "Holloway," he said, his voice taking on the smooth, professional tone he used for business calls. "It's me," said a man's voice, gruff and impatient. "We need to talk about the delivery. There's been a complication." Richard's eyes flicked to Lucas, and he quickly disconnected the call from the car system, pressing the phone to his ear instead. "Can't talk right now," he said tersely. "I'll call you back in an hour." The rest of the afternoon passed in a blur. The dentist appointment was real, at least a quick checkup that revealed no cavities. Richard played the role of concerned stepfather perfectly, asking appropriate questions and smiling at the hygienist's jokes. They stopped for ice cream as promised, Richard insisting on taking a photo of Lucas with his chocolate cone, to show your mom what a brave boy you were at the dentist. By the time they returned home, Madeline was there, sitting at the kitchen table with a coloring book while Mrs. Grayson prepared a snack. The older woman smiled as they entered, but Lucas noticed how her eyes lingered on Richard with something like uncertainty. "She's been very quiet today, Mrs. Grayson said, nodding toward Madeline. "Hardly said a word during pickup. Is she feeling all right?" "Just a little under the weather," Richard answered smoothly. "Nothing to worry about. We appreciate you bringing her home, Dorothy." Mrs. Grayson hesitated, then patted Lucas on the shoulder. "You take care, young man. Tell your mother I said hello." After she left, Richard placed the bag of ice cream in the freezer and turned to Madeline with an exaggerated smile. "How's my princess? Did you have a good day at school?" Madeline nodded, but her eyes remained fixed on her coloring book. Lucas could see that she'd barely marked the page. Just a few haphazard scribbles in the corner, nothing like her usual careful work. "I got you strawberry ice cream," Lucas told her, pulling up a chair beside her. "We can have some after dinner." Madeline looked up at him then, a flicker of her old self visible in her small smile. "Thanks, Lucas," she whispered. Richard watched them for a moment, then cleared his throat. "Lucas, why don't you go start your homework? I'll keep an eye on Madeline until your mom gets home." "I don't have much homework," Lucas said quickly. "I can just stay down here." Richard's expression didn't change, but something in his eyes hardened. "That wasn't a suggestion, buddy. Homework. Now." Lucas looked at Madeline, who had gone back to staring at her coloring book. "I promised to read to her," he said, a note of desperation creeping into his voice. "You can read to her before bed," Richard replied, his tone final. Right now, I need some quality time with my favorite girl. He moved to stand behind Madeline's chair, his large hands coming to rest on her small shoulders. We're going to have fun, aren't we, princess? Madeline's crayon stilled on the page. She didn't look up, didn't nod, didn't respond at all. Just sat very, very still beneath Richard's hands. Lucas felt something cold and hard form in the pit of his stomach. It was the same feeling he'd had the day his father left, when he'd watched from the window as the car disappeared down the street, the certainty that something important was being taken away, and he was powerless to stop it. I'll be right upstairs, he told Madeline, willing her to look at him. If you need anything, just call me. Richard's smile widened. Run along, Lucas. We'll be fine down here. Just fine. Lucas climbed the stairs slowly, each step an effort. In his room, he didn't bother with his backpack. Instead, he moved to the window that overlooked the backyard, positioning himself so he could see part of the kitchen below. From this angle, he could just make out Madeline's small form still at the table, and Richard moving around the kitchen, opening cabinets, taking out a glass. Something was wrong in their house. Something was wrong with Richard. And Lucas was beginning to fear that no one would believe him until it was too late. He pressed his hand against the cool glass of the window and watched as shadows lengthened across the yard, turning the familiar landscape into something strange and threatening. In a few hours, his mother would return from her shift, exhausted and distracted. Richard would greet her with a kiss and a glass of wine, would tell her about Lucas's successful dentist appointment, would comment on how peacefully Madeline had been sleeping lately, and Lucas would lie awake in his bed, listening to the sounds of the house settling around him, counting the hours until morning, and wondering what medicine Richard would give his sister tonight. In the fading light, Lucas made a decision. He pulled his notebook from his backpack and began to write, documenting everything he had seen that day. The pills, the phone call, Madeline's unusual behavior. It wasn't much, but it was something. Evidence. Proof. Because Lucas Mitchell was many things, a third grader, a brother, a son, but most of all he was a watcher. And what he was seeing scared him more than anything ever had before. The next 2 weeks passed with excruciating slowness. Lucas had begun to measure time differently, not by hours or days, but by the subtle shifts in Madeline's behavior. Today was a quiet day, which meant she'd barely spoken 3 words at breakfast, her small fingers fumbling with her spoon as she pushed cereal around her bowl. Richard had given her medicine the night before. Lucas had heard him in her room after their mother left for work, the soft murmur of his voice followed by the sound of liquid being poured into a glass. Drink it all down, princess. That's a good girl. This will help with those bad dreams. Lucas had stood in the hallway, fists clenched, listening. There had been no bad dreams. Madeline hadn't cried out or called for their mother. She'd been sleeping peacefully until Richard entered her room. Now, at school, Lucas stared at the clock above Mrs. Winter's desk, watching the minute hand creep toward 3 o'clock. The pages of his notebook were filled with observations, dates, times. A meticulous record that grew more troubling with each entry. His mother had dismissed his first attempt to show her, and his second notebook had disappeared from his backpack 3 days ago, after Richard had insisted on helping him organize his school supplies. Lucas, Mrs. Winter's voice broke through his thoughts. The bell rang, honey. Everyone else has gone. Lucas blinked, suddenly aware of the empty classroom. Sorry, he mumbled, gathering his things. I was thinking. Mrs. Winters moved to sit on the edge of the desk in front of his. Her eyes, magnified slightly by her glasses, were kind but concerned. You've been doing a lot of that lately. And your math test yesterday. She paused. That's not like you, Lucas. 3 wrong answers on material I know you understand. Lucas looked down at his hands. There was still a faint bruise on his right wrist, yellowing now at the edges. I didn't sleep well, he said, which wasn't entirely a lie. Sleep had become a luxury, something that came in fitful bursts between listening for sounds from Madeline's room and worrying about what would happen if he closed his eyes for too long. Is everything all right at home? Mrs. Winters asked, her voice gentle. I know adjusting to a step-parent can be challenging. For a moment, Lucas considered telling her everything. About the pill bottles with scraped-off labels, about Madeline's increasing lethargy, about the way Richard's face changed when no one else was looking. But the words stuck in his throat. What if she didn't believe him? What if she called his mother, who would tell Richard, who would... It's fine, he said, forcing a smile that felt stiff on his face. Just normal stuff. Mrs. Winters studied him for a long moment, then sighed. You know you can talk to me if you need to, right? About anything. Lucas nodded and stood up, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. I should go. Richard's picking me up today. All right. But Lucas... She hesitated, then reached into her desk drawer and pulled out a small leather-bound journal. I thought you might like this. For your stories. Lucas took the journal, running his fingers over its smooth cover. Thank you, he said, surprised. He'd always enjoyed writing. Adventures mainly, stories about brave children and magical escapes, though he hadn't had much time for it lately. Maybe you could write about how you're feeling, Mrs. Winters suggested. Sometimes that helps when things are confusing or difficult. Outside, Richard's black SUV idled at the curb, its engine a low growl in the quiet afternoon. Lucas tucked the journal into his backpack and headed for the door, pausing briefly to look back at his teacher. Thank you, he said again, with more feeling this time. The heat hit him like a wall as he stepped outside. Late May in Connecticut had turned unseasonably warm, the air thick with humidity that promised a storm later. Richard had the air conditioning blasting, the car interior cool and smelling faintly of the cologne he always wore. Something expensive and sharp that made Lucas's nose itch. How was school, buddy? Richard asked, pulling away from the curb with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Fine, Lucas answered, looking out the window at the passing streets. Is Madeline at home? Mrs. Grayson dropped her off about an hour ago. She's napping. Richard glanced at him. You look tired. Not sleeping well. The question carried an undercurrent that made Lucas's skin prickle. I'm okay. Richard hummed noncommittally, his fingers tapping the steering wheel in a rhythm that seemed almost nervous. So, I've been thinking, he said after a moment. Maybe we should take a little trip this weekend. The four of us. Head up to that lake your mom's always talking about. Lucas looked at him in surprise. Lake Champlain. It had been their family's favorite place when his father was still around. A small cabin on the Vermont side of the lake where they'd spent 2 weeks every summer swimming and fishing and making s'mores by the fire. They hadn't been back since the divorce. That's the one. Your mom's been working so hard, and I think we could all use a change of scenery. What do you say? Lucas struggled to keep his expression neutral. Part of him thrilled at the idea of returning to the lake, of showing Madeline the places he'd loved when he was her age. But the larger part, the part that had learned to watch and listen and document, felt a warning prickle at the base of his skull. What about Mom's work schedule? He asked carefully. She usually can't get weekend shifts off without a lot of notice. Richard's smile tightened fractionally. Leave that to me. I have a good relationship with her supervisor. I'm sure we can work something out. They turned onto Maple Street, the familiar row of colonial homes with their neat lawns and trimmed hedges coming into view. Lucas noticed Mrs. Henderson in her garden as they drove past, raising a hand in greeting. He'd thought about talking to her. Their next-door neighbor had always been kind to him and Madeline, slipping them homemade cookies and asking about school, but something had held him back. The fear, perhaps, that she wouldn't believe him either. Or worse, that she would tell his mother, who would tell Richard. Their house looked tranquil in the afternoon sun, white clapboard with dark green shutters, a small American flag fluttering from the porch post. It had been Lucas's great-grandmother's house originally, passed down through the family until it came to his mother. Mitchell property, his father used to say proudly, before he left them for a marketing job in California and a woman named Jenna who taught yoga and didn't want children. Home sweet home, Richard said, pulling into the driveway and cutting the engine. Why don't you go check on your sister while I start dinner? Your mom has that meeting with her supervisor tonight, so it's just the three of us. Lucas frowned. What meeting? She didn't tell you? Hospital budget review or something. She'll be home late. Richard reached over and ruffled Lucas's hair, his hand lingering a moment too long. Go on now. I'll call you when dinner's ready. Inside, the house was quiet except for the soft hum of the air conditioning. Lucas dropped his backpack by the door and headed upstairs, his footsteps silent on the carpeted treads. Madeline's door was ajar, a strip of late afternoon sunlight falling across her small bed, where she lay curled on her side, one arm wrapped around her stuffed rabbit. Lucas approached quietly, watching the rise and fall of her chest beneath her favorite purple dress. Her blonde curls were damp at the temples, her cheeks flushed with sleep. She looked peaceful, but there was something about the stillness of her that sent a chill through him. She'd always been a restless sleeper, tossing and turning and sometimes talking in her dreams. Now she lay utterly motionless, as if her body had forgotten how to move. "Maddie?" he whispered, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Hey, Maddie Bear. It's me." She stirred slightly, her eyelids fluttering. "Lucas." Her voice was thick, the words slurring at the edges. "Yeah, it's me. I just got home from school." He reached out to brush a curl from her forehead. "How are you feeling?" Madeline blinked slowly, as if it required tremendous effort to focus on his face. "Sleepy," she murmured, "and my tummy feels funny." Lucas frowned, placing a hand on her forehead. She felt warm but not feverish. "Did Richard give you something to eat when you got home from preschool?" She nodded, her eyes already drooping again. "Juice, and a cookie." But the juice tasted bad. A cold feeling settled in Lucas's stomach. "What kind of bad?" Madeline wrinkled her nose. "Bitter. Like when I licked that penny." Lucas stood up abruptly, his hands curling into fists at his sides. He'd seen Richard preparing Madeline's snacks before, had watched from the doorway as his stepfather stirred something into her apple juice, a fine white powder that dissolved almost instantly. When Lucas had asked about it, Richard had smiled his tight smile and said it was just a little vitamin supplement, nothing to worry about. But vitamins didn't make you sleep for hours, didn't make your words come out wrong or your movements slow and clumsy. "I'll be right back," he told Madeline, tucking her blanket more securely around her. "Just rest, okay?" Downstairs, he could hear Richard moving around in the kitchen, the clink of pots and pans, the sound of water running. Lucas hesitated at the bottom of the stairs, torn between confronting his stepfather and searching for evidence while he had the chance. The latter won out. Richard was less likely to notice him exploring the house than his mother would be, especially if he was busy with dinner preparations. Moving silently down the hallway, Lucas headed for the small study that had once been his mother's reading room, but had gradually become Richard's domain over the past 6 months. The door was closed but not locked, a small mercy. He slipped inside, closing it behind him with a barely audible click. The room was meticulously neat, with a desk by the window and bookshelves lining 2 walls. Richard's laptop sat on the desk, closed and likely password protected. Lucas had no interest in it anyway. What he was looking for would be hidden somewhere more secure. He started with the desk drawers, sliding them open one by one and rifling carefully through their contents. Pens, paper clips, a checkbook in his mother's name, a stack of business cards for Richard Holloway, pharmaceutical consultant. Nothing unusual. The bookshelf yielded similar results. Medical references mostly, with a few best-selling thrillers mixed in. Lucas was about to give up when he noticed a small filing cabinet tucked into the corner behind the desk. It was the kind with a lock, but to his surprise, the key was still in it, as if Richard had been interrupted while retrieving something. Heart pounding, Lucas knelt beside the cabinet and pulled open the top drawer. Inside were neatly labeled folders, household expenses, insurance papers, car maintenance records. Normal, boring adult stuff. But in the back, partially hidden beneath a folder marked taxes, was an unmarked manila envelope. Lucas extracted it carefully and peeked inside. Photographs slid out onto his palm, and he felt his breath catch in his throat. They showed a woman he didn't recognize, blonde, pretty, tired-looking, and a small boy about Madeline's age. In one picture, the boy sat on the woman's lap on a park bench, both of them smiling at the camera. In another, they stood in front of a house Lucas didn't recognize, the woman's arm around the boy's shoulders. Lucas turned the photos over. On the back of one, in neat handwriting that wasn't Richard's, someone had written, Tommy's 4th birthday, Marcy and Tommy Sanders, Columbus, Ohio. Who were these people? And why did Richard have their photos? Lucas slid them back into the envelope, his mind racing. As he went to return it to the drawer, he noticed something else. A small notebook wedged into the space behind the folders. He pulled it out, recognizing it immediately as the one that had disappeared from his backpack earlier that week. His careful documentation of Madeline's symptoms, the pill bottles, Richard's suspicious behavior, all of it laid out in his neat 3rd-grade handwriting. The sound of footsteps in the hallway sent a jolt of panic through him. Quickly, he shoved the notebook into the waistband of his jeans, covered by his t-shirt, and closed the filing cabinet drawer as quietly as he could. He had just straightened up when the study door opened. Richard stood in the doorway, his expression shifting from surprise to something darker as he took in Lucas's presence by the filing cabinet. "What are you doing in here, buddy?" he asked, his voice dangerously soft. Lucas's mind raced for a plausible explanation. "I was looking for paper for my homework," he said, forcing his voice to remain steady. "Mrs. Winters wants us to make a family tree, and I thought maybe there were some old photos in here I could use." Richard stepped into the room, closing the door behind him with a quiet click that somehow sounded final. "Is that so? And did you find what you were looking for?" Lucas shook his head, keeping his arms at his sides to avoid touching the notebook hidden beneath his shirt. "No, sir. Just some old bills and stuff." Richard moved closer, his pale eyes never leaving Lucas's face. "You know, Lucas, I've tried very hard to be patient with you, to understand that this transition has been difficult for you, but I can't help feeling that you don't trust me." He reached out, placing a hand on Lucas's shoulder. "And trust is very important in a family, don't you think?" Lucas nodded mechanically, his heart hammering so loudly he was sure Richard must hear it. "Yes, sir. So if there's something bothering you, something you're concerned about, you should come to me directly." Richard's fingers tightened imperceptibly on his shoulder. "Not go sneaking around through my things when you think I won't notice." "I wasn't. Don't lie to me, Lucas." Richard's voice remained calm, almost gentle, but his eyes had gone flat and cold. "I don't like liars, especially not in my own home." "It's our home," Lucas said before he could stop himself. "It was my great-grandmother's. It belongs to my mom, not you." For a moment, Richard's mask slipped completely, and Lucas saw something in his expression that made his blood run cold. A flash of such intense anger that he instinctively took a step back, bumping against the filing cabinet. Then it was gone, replaced by Richard's usual calculated smile. "Of course it is, buddy. I misspoke." He dropped his hand from Lucas's shoulder and moved toward the desk. "Why don't you go wash up for dinner? I've made spaghetti your favorite, right? And maybe after, if Madeline's feeling better, we can all watch a movie together." Lucas nodded, edging toward the door, desperate to escape the suffocating atmosphere of the small room. "Okay, I'll go check on her." "You do that," Richard said, his tone casual once more. "And Lucas? Next time you need something from my study, just ask. No more sneaking around, all right?" "Yes, sir," Lucas said, slipping out the door and into the hallway, where he finally allowed himself to breathe. The notebook felt like it was burning against his skin, its presence both a triumph and a danger. He needed to hide it somewhere Richard wouldn't think to look. Somewhere safe. Upstairs, Madeline was still asleep, her breathing deep and even. Lucas stood in her doorway for a long moment, watching her, his mind churning with what he had discovered. Who were Marcy and Tommy Sanders? And why did Richard have their photos hidden in his filing cabinet? More importantly, what had happened to them? Lucas went to his room and carefully removed the notebook from his waistband, sliding it between his mattress and box spring, a temporary hiding place until he could think of somewhere better. Then he took out the new journal Mrs. Winters had given him and opened it to the first blank page. May 23rd, he wrote, Found photos in Richard's filing cabinet. Woman and little boy Marcy and Tommy Sanders from Columbus, Ohio. Boy looks about Maddie's age. Don't know who they are, but Richard is hiding their pictures. Also found my missing notebook. Richard had it all along, which means he knows I'm watching him. Madeline got medicine again last night. Still sleeping now. 5:17 p.m. Says her juice tasted bitter. Said her stomach feels funny. Mom working late tonight. Just us and Richard for dinner. Something is very wrong. Nobody will listen to me. Need proof. He closed the journal and slid it into his pillowcase, then headed to the bathroom to wash his hands for dinner. As he reached for the soap, his gaze fell on the medicine cabinet above the sink. It was where Richard kept his special medicine, the unmarked pill bottles Lucas had glimpsed before. Making a quick decision, he stepped onto the edge of the bathtub and opened the cabinet. Inside were the usual items: toothpaste, bandages, his mother's migraine medication, but no pill bottles. Richard must have moved them after realizing Lucas had seen them. As he climbed down, his foot slipped on the porcelain edge of the tub, sending him crashing to the floor with a thud that seemed to echo through the entire house. Pain shot through his elbow where it had struck the tile, and he bit back a cry. "Lucas!" Richard's voice called from downstairs. "Everything okay up there?" "Fine," Lucas shouted back, scrambling to his feet. "Just dropped something." He ran cold water over his elbow, watching a bruise begin to form almost immediately, a dull purple stain spreading beneath his skin. Another mark to add to his collection. Physical evidence of a home that had become a battleground where the enemy was invisible to everyone but him. Dinner was a tense affair, with Richard maintaining a steady stream of cheerful conversation while Lucas pushed spaghetti around his plate and tried not to think about the photos in the filing cabinet or the notebook hidden in his mattress. Madeline had finally woken up, but she sat slumped in her booster seat, listlessly twirling pasta on her fork without eating it. "Not hungry, princess?" Richard asked, his tone solicitous. "Those tummy troubles still bothering you?" Madeline nodded, her eyes downcast. "Can I be excused?" she asked in a small voice. Richard frowned. "You've hardly touched your dinner. Just a few more bites for me. Okay?" Lucas watched as his sister obediently lifted a forkful of pasta to her mouth, chewing mechanically. "She doesn't feel well," he said. "Maybe she should lie down." Richard turned his attention to Lucas, his smile never wavering. "I appreciate your concern, buddy, but I think I can handle this. Madeline needs proper nutrition, especially when she's not feeling her best." "But, Lucas," Richard's voice held a warning note. "Why don't you tell me about school today? Any interesting assignments?" Lucas recognized the deflection for what it was, but he played along, describing a science experiment they'd done with plants and different types of light. All the while, he watched Madeline struggling with her dinner, her small face pinched with discomfort. When she suddenly pushed back from the table and clapped a hand over her mouth, Lucas was on his feet instantly. "Bathroom," he said, taking her hand and pulling her from her chair. "Come on, Maddie." They made it just in time, Madeline emptying the contents of her stomach into the toilet, while Lucas held back her hair and murmured reassurances. "It's okay, Maddie Bear. You're okay." She looked up at him afterward, her face pale and tear-streaked. "I don't feel good, Lucas." "I know." He wet a washcloth and gently wiped her face. "I think you should lie down. I'll bring you some water." Richard appeared in the doorway, his expression a perfect mask of concern. "Is she all right? Poor princess. You really aren't feeling well today, are you?" Madeline shrank back against Lucas, her small body trembling. The reaction was subtle, so subtle that Lucas might have missed it if he hadn't been paying such close attention, but it was unmistakable. She was afraid of Richard. "I'm going to put her to bed," Lucas said, his voice steadier than he felt. "She's tired." Richard studied them for a moment, then nodded. "All right, I'll clean up down here and check on her in a little while. She might need some medicine if she's coming down with something." "No!" The word burst from Lucas before he could stop it. Both Richard and Madeline stared at him in surprise. "I mean, she just threw up. Medicine might make it worse." Richard's eyes narrowed slightly, but his tone remained mild. We'll see how she feels later. Go on, get her settled. I'll be up soon. Lucas helped Madeline to her room, where he tucked her into bed and sat beside her, holding her hand until her eyelids grew heavy. I don't want any medicine, Lucas, she whispered as she drifted towards sleep. It makes the bad dreams come. What bad dreams? Lucas asked, alarm prickling along his spine. But Madeline was already asleep, her breathing deep and even. Her small face relaxed in a way it rarely was when she was awake these days. Lucas sat with her a while longer, listening to the sounds of Richard moving around downstairs. Water running, dishes clinking, cupboards opening and closing. Normal sounds that somehow seemed menacing in their ordinariness. Eventually, he returned to his own room, leaving Madeline's door ajar so he could hear if she needed him in the night. He retrieved his journal from the pillowcase and added a new entry. Madeline sick after dinner. Threw up everything. Richard wanted to give her medicine again, but I said no. She's afraid of him. I could see it today when he came into the bathroom. She said the medicine gives her bad dreams. Need to find out what's in those pills. Need to find out who Marcy and Tommy Sanders are and what happened to them. Mom working late tonight. Don't know when she'll be home. He paused, chewing on the end of his pencil, then added, I'm scared, but I have to protect Maddie. No one else will. From downstairs came the sound of the front door opening, followed by his mother's voice, home earlier than expected. Lucas closed the journal and returned it to its hiding place, then crossed to his bedroom door, cracking it open to listen. Just couldn't concentrate, his mother was saying, her voice tired but warm. All I could think about was coming home to my 3 favorite people. Well, 2 of them are already in bed, I'm afraid, Richard replied. Madeline isn't feeling well, upset stomach. And Lucas was so tired he practically fell asleep at the dinner table. But you're just in time for a glass of wine and some adult conversation. I've missed you today. Lucas nearly called out to correct this lie, but something held him back. Richard had sent him a clear message earlier in the study. He was watching, and he knew Lucas was watching back. Any confrontation now would only put Madeline at greater risk. Instead, he returned to his bed and lay down fully clothed, staring at the glow-in-the-dark stars on his ceiling. Remnants from a happier time when his father had helped him arrange them into real constellations. The Big Dipper, Orion, Cassiopeia. His father had told him stories about each one, myths of heroes and monsters and transformations. Lucas wished for a transformation now, to be older, stronger, someone who could protect his sister and make adults listen. But he was just a 9-year-old boy with a notebook full of observations and a growing sense of dread that no one else seemed to share. In the darkness of his room, Lucas made a plan. Tomorrow he would go to the school library during lunch and use the computer to search for information about Marcy and Tommy Sanders from Columbus, Ohio. He would continue documenting everything in his journal, the one Mrs. Winters had given him, which Richard didn't know about yet. And he would find a way to keep Richard from giving Madeline any more medicine, even if it meant staying awake all night to watch over her. Because something was very wrong in their house, and Lucas was beginning to fear that time was running out. The next morning dawned gray and rainy, the storm that had threatened yesterday finally arriving with a steady downpour that drummed against the roof and windows. Lucas woke early, before his alarm, and immediately went to check on Madeline. Her room was empty, the bed neatly made, her stuffed rabbit propped against the pillow. Panic surged through him as he raced downstairs, nearly colliding with his mother in the kitchen doorway. Whoa, where's the fire? Elaine asked, steadying him with a hand on his shoulder. She was dressed for work in blue scrubs, her dark hair pulled back in a neat ponytail, a travel mug of coffee in her free hand. Where's Madeline? Lucas demanded, peering around her into the kitchen. Richard took her to preschool early. She had that field trip to the Children's Museum today, remember? The bus was leaving at 8. His mother studied his face, her smile fading. Honey, are you okay? You look like you've seen a ghost. Lucas forced himself to take a deep breath. The field trip. He had forgotten, but now he remembered Madeline's teacher mentioning it at pickup last week. "I'm fine," he said. "Just had a bad dream." Elaine set down her coffee and pulled him into a hug. "My sweet boy. Always so serious." She kissed the top of his head. "I'm sorry I got home so late last night. I missed saying goodnight to you." "It's okay," Lucas murmured, inhaling the familiar scent of her perfume. Something light and floral that she'd worn for as long as he could remember. For a moment, he considered telling her everything. About the photos in Richard's filing cabinet, about the medicine, about Madeline's fear. But then he remembered how she had dismissed his concerns before, how she looked at Richard with such trust and happiness. "Mom," he said instead, pulling back to look at her. "Do you know anyone named Marcy Sanders? Or Tommy? From Columbus?" Elaine's brow furrowed. "No, I don't think so." "Why?" "Just something I heard Richard mention on the phone," Lucas lied, watching her face carefully. "Oh." She seemed unconcerned, turning back to gather her things. "Probably a work colleague. Richard has clients all over the Midwest." She glanced at her watch and frowned. "Speaking of which, I need to get going. Richard's picking up Madeline after her field trip and taking her to that doctor's appointment. But he'll be back to get you from school at the regular time. There's lunch money on the counter." Lucas nodded, his mind racing. Doctor's appointment? This was the first he'd heard of it. "What doctor's appointment?" "Just a checkup. Richard noticed she's been more tired than usual lately, and he thought it would be good to have Dr. Wilson take a look at her." Elaine slipped on her jacket and picked up her keys. "That was thoughtful of him, don't you think? I've been so busy with work, I might not have noticed." "But I noticed," Lucas wanted to say. "I've been telling you for weeks that something's wrong." Instead, he just nodded again. "What time will they be home?" "Around 4, I think. I've got a double shift today, so I won't be back until late." She gave him another quick hug. "Be good for Richard, okay? And try to get along. He really does care about you and Madeline." After she left, Lucas stood in the empty kitchen, listening to the rain against the windows and the slow tick of the clock on the wall. A doctor's appointment that his mother hadn't scheduled. Richard taking Madeline alone, without Lucas there to watch what was said, what was done. His appetite gone, Lucas grabbed an apple from the fruit bowl and stuffed it into his backpack along with his books and the journal Mrs. Winters had given him. As he headed for the front door, he passed the small table in the entryway where his mother kept her address book and calendar. The page for May was visible, and Lucas paused to scan it. There, on today's date, written in his mother's neat handwriting, Maddie Dar, Wilson, 2:30 p.m. So it was real, at least. But why hadn't anyone mentioned it to him before today? The school day passed in a blur of worry and distraction. During lunch, Lucas hurried to the library and found an available computer in the back corner where no one would see his screen. He opened a search engine and typed, "Marcy Sanders, Tommy, Columbus, Ohio." The results loaded slowly, news articles mostly, but before he could click on any of them, a hand descended on his shoulder. "Lucas Mitchell," said Mrs. Greeley, the librarian. "What are you doing on the computer during lunch period? You know students need special permission." Lucas quickly closed the browser window. "Sorry, Mrs. Greeley. I was just looking something up for a project." She gave him a stern look. "If you need computer time, you need to ask your teacher for a pass. Now go on back to the cafeteria before you miss lunch entirely." Frustrated, Lucas gathered his things and headed back to the lunchroom, where he picked at a sandwich and tried to think of another way to find information. The school computers were too closely monitored, and they didn't have a computer at home. His mother had always said they couldn't afford one, and though Richard surely could, he hadn't offered to buy one. The public library might be an option, but it was 6 blocks away, and with Richard picking him up after school, there was no way to go there without raising suspicion. By the time the final bell rang, Lucas had formulated a new plan. Instead of waiting for Richard in the usual pickup area, he slipped out the side door of the school and made his way to the playground, where he could watch the parking lot without being immediately visible. If Richard arrived and couldn't find him, he might let something slip. Make a phone call, show frustration or anger that would be noticed by the teachers on duty. Lucas crouched behind the large slide, ignoring the rain that had slowed to a drizzle but still dampened his hair and clothes. From this vantage point, he could see Richard's SUV pull into the lot exactly on time, its black paint gleaming wetly in the gray afternoon light. Richard emerged, dressed more casually than usual in jeans and a dark sweater. He scanned the groups of children, his expression pleasant but his posture tense. When he didn't see Lucas in the usual spot, he approached Mrs. Winters, who was supervising dismissal. Lucas was too far away to hear their conversation, but he could see Mrs. Winters frown and shake her head. Richard's smile remained fixed, but something in his bearing changed. A stiffening of his shoulders, a subtle shift that Lucas recognized as barely contained anger. Mrs. Winters pointed toward the school building, and Richard nodded, turning to head inside. The moment he disappeared through the front doors, Lucas made his decision. He sprinted from his hiding place toward the street, ignoring the shouts of a teacher on the playground who spotted him leaving school grounds alone. He ran, his backpack bouncing against his spine, his lungs burning with the effort. 6 blocks to the public library, where there were computers and kind librarians who might help him search for information about Marcy and Tommy Sanders. 6 blocks to a place where Richard wouldn't immediately think to look for him. As he ran, the rain began to fall more heavily again, soaking through his jacket and plastering his hair to his forehead. Cars passed, their headlights already on against the gloom, their wipers slashing at the downpour. No one paid any attention to a small boy running through the rain. Just another kid eager to get home out of the weather. The library came into view, its brick facade and wide steps a welcome sight. Lucas slowed to catch his breath, then climbed the steps and pushed through the heavy doors into the quiet warmth beyond. The children's librarian, Ms. Abernathy, looked up from the circulation desk with a smile that quickly turned to concern. "Lucas Mitchell, you're soaked through. What on earth are you doing here alone in this weather?" Lucas managed a smile, though his teeth had begun to chatter with cold and nerves. "Hi, Ms. Abernathy. I need to use a computer for a school project. It's really important." She frowned, coming around the desk to look at him more closely. "Does your mother know you're here? Or your stepfather? They must be worried sick." "My mom's at work," Lucas said, which was true. "And Richard is picking up my sister from her doctor's appointment." Also true as far as he knew. "I'm supposed to meet them here afterward." A lie, but a necessary one. Ms. Abernathy still looked doubtful, but she nodded toward the bank of computers along the far wall. "All right, but I'm gonna call your house in 15 minutes if they don't arrive. You're lucky I've known you since you were in diapers, young man, or I'd be on the phone to your mother right now." "Thank you," Lucas said, and meant it. He hurried to the furthest computer and logged on with the generic guest account the library provided for patrons without cards. His hands were shaking as he opened the browser and typed in his search query again. Marcy Sanders, Tommy, Columbus, Ohio. This time, he was able to click on the first result. A news article from the Columbus Dispatch dated 14 months earlier. The headline made his blood run cold. "Local woman and son missing. Police seek information." The article was brief, just a few paragraphs with a grainy photo that matched the one Lucas had found in Richard's filing cabinet. Marcy Sanders, 31, and her son Tommy, 4, had disappeared from their apartment in Columbus. Neighbors reported they had last been seen with Marcy's new boyfriend, a pharmaceutical sales representative named Robert Henderson. Police were seeking Henderson for questioning but believed he might have left the state. Lucas stared at the screen, his hands trembling so badly he could barely navigate to the next search result. This one was from 3 months after the first, an update noting that while Robert Henderson had been located and questioned, he had been released due to lack of evidence. Marcy and Tommy Sanders remained missing. Robert Henderson, not Richard Holloway. The room seemed to tilt around Lucas as pieces began to click into place. He clicked frantically through more search results, finding mentions of other missing women and children in Ohio, Indiana, and Pennsylvania over the past 5 years. In each case, a single mother with a young child had disappeared after beginning a relationship with a man matching Henderson's description, though the name was different each time. Lucas Mitchell. He jumped at the sound of his name, spinning around to find Ms. Abernathy standing behind him, her expression a mixture of concern and exasperation. Your stepfather is here looking for you. He's been driving all over town. He's at the front desk now. Lucas quickly closed the browser window, his heart hammering against his ribs. I'm sorry, he said automatically. I lost track of time. Well, you'd better get out there and apologize properly. He looked worried sick. Miss Abernathy shook her head disapprovingly. And soaking wet from searching for you in this weather. Lucas gathered his backpack with shaking hands and followed her to the front desk, where Richard stood dripping onto the carpet runner, his expression a perfect mask of parental concern. When he spotted Lucas, relief washed over his features so convincingly that even Lucas might have believed it if he hadn't just seen what he had. Lucas! Thank God! Richard rushed forward, dropping to one knee to place his hands on Lucas's shoulders. I've been looking everywhere for you. The school said you ran off. I was about to call the police. I'm sorry, Lucas mumbled, avoiding his gaze. I wanted to use the library computer for a project. I forgot to tell you. Richard pulled him into a hug that felt like a vice closing around him. Don't ever do that again, he said, his mouth close to Lucas's ear. You scared me half to death, buddy. As Richard straightened up, he kept one hand firmly on Lucas's shoulder, his fingers digging in just enough to communicate a message beyond what Abernathy could see. Thank you for keeping an eye on him, he told the librarian, his smile warm and grateful. Kids this age, they think they're so grown up, don't they? Miss Abernathy smiled back, completely charmed. He's a good boy, just a bit forgetful sometimes. Will we see you at the summer reading kickoff next week? Lucas always participates. We wouldn't miss it, Richard assured her. Come on, sport. Madeline's waiting in the car. Poor thing's exhausted after her doctor's appointment. Outside, the rain had stopped, but the sky remained heavy with dark clouds. Richard led Lucas to the SUV parked in the fire lane directly in front of the library steps, his grip never loosening. When they reached the car, he opened the back door and practically shoved Lucas inside. Madeline was indeed there, strapped into her booster seat, her head lolling against the side support. Her eyes were half closed, unfocused, her small body limp. Lucas reached for her hand, alarmed by how cool and clammy it felt. Maddie, he whispered. Hey, Maddie Bear. You okay? She stirred slightly at the sound of his voice, her eyelids fluttering. Lucas, she murmured, the words slurring. Tired. Richard slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, locking the doors with a decisive click. In the rearview mirror, his eyes met Lucas's. Cold, calculating, nothing like the concerned stepfather he had portrayed for Miss Abernathy. That was quite a stunt you pulled, Lucas, he said, his voice no longer carrying any pretense of warmth. Running off like that, making me look for you all over town, making me worry. Lucas swallowed hard, holding tightly to Madeline's limp hand. I'm sorry. Are you? Richard pulled away from the curb, driving faster than usual through the wet streets. Because I'm not sure you understand the situation here. I'm not sure you understand what's at stake. Lucas didn't respond, focusing instead on Madeline. Her breathing was shallow, her skin pale except for two bright spots of color high on her cheeks. What happened at the doctor? Is she sick? Richard laughed, a sound with no humor in it. Dr. Wilson pronounced her perfectly healthy. A little anemic, perhaps. He suggested an iron supplement. His eyes flicked to the rearview mirror again. She got upset afterward. Threw quite a tantrum, actually. I had to give her something to calm her down. Lucas felt a surge of anger so intense it briefly overpowered his fear. You drugged her again. I helped her relax. There's a difference. Richard turned onto their street, slowing as they approached the house. And she'll need to stay relaxed for our trip tomorrow. What trip? The lake house. I told you about it yesterday. Remember? Your mother got the time off. We're leaving first thing in the morning. Richard pulled into the driveway and cut the engine. A nice family getaway. Just what we all need. Lucas stared at him, his mind racing. The lake house was 3 hours away, isolated at the end of a dirt road, with no neighbors for at least a mile in any direction. If Richard took them there, "My mom would never agree to go so suddenly," he said, his voice stronger than he expected. "She plans things in advance. She would have told me days ago." Richard turned in his seat to look directly at Lucas, all pretense gone. "Your mother does what I suggest. She trusts me, which is more than I can say for you." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small orange pill bottle, shaking it slightly so the contents rattled. "I know you were in my study yesterday, Lucas. I know you've been watching me, writing things down, asking questions." Lucas felt as if all the air had been sucked from the car. "I don't know what you're talking about. Don't lie to me. I told you I hate liars." Richard's voice remained calm, almost conversational. "I found your little notebook between your mattress and box spring. Not a very original hiding place, I have to say. I'm disappointed." Lucas glanced at Madeline, who had fallen completely asleep now, her head lolling forward at an uncomfortable angle. "What did you give her?" he demanded. "What's in those pills?" "Nothing that will hurt her, as long as the dosage is carefully controlled." Richard tucked the pill bottle back into his pocket. "Which it will be, as long as you cooperate." "Cooperate with what?" "Being a good, obedient son. Not causing trouble. Not asking questions." Richard smiled, the expression chilling in its emptiness. "We're going to the lake house tomorrow, Lucas. All 4 of us. One happy family. And you're going to be on your best behavior, or I might have to give Madeline a little more of her medicine than is strictly necessary. Do you understand?" Lucas understood all too well. It wasn't just a threat, it was a promise. Richard, or Robert Henderson, or whatever his real name was, had done this before. Marcy and Tommy Sanders had disappeared after meeting him. And now he was planning to take Lucas's family away too. "I understand," Lucas said quietly, his mind already racing ahead, trying to formulate a plan. He would need to warn his mother somehow without Richard knowing. Would need to find a way to protect Madeline. Would need to get help before it was too late. Richard studied him for a moment longer, then nodded, apparently satisfied. "Good boy. Now let's get your sister inside. She needs to rest before our big day tomorrow." As Richard lifted Madeline from her booster seat, her head falling limply against his shoulder, Lucas felt the weight of his knowledge pressing down on him like a physical thing. Richard Holloway was not who he claimed to be. The medicine he gave Madeline wasn't for her health. And the trip to the lake house wasn't a family vacation. It was something else entirely. Something Lucas couldn't fully comprehend but knew instinctively was dangerous. Time was running out. Lucas had until morning to find a way to save his sister and his mother from a man who had already made other families disappear. That night, after a tense dinner where his mother chattered excitedly about their sudden trip to the lake house, Richard arranged everything. Isn't he thoughtful? Lucas lay awake in his bed, listening to the house settle around him. His recovered notebook was gone. Richard had taken it, but he still had the journal Mrs. Winters had given him, now hidden inside the hollow base of his bedside lamp, a hiding place his father had shown him years ago. In it, he had written everything he'd discovered at the library, every detail he could remember about Marcy and Tommy Sanders, about Robert Henderson and the other missing families. He'd added his suspicions about the medicine Richard gave Madeline, and his fears about the trip to the lake house. Evidence. Proof. A record that might be found if Lucas pushed the thought away. There would be no if. He would find a way to stop Richard. He had to. From down the hall came the sound of his mother's laugh, followed by Richard's deeper voice, too muffled to make out the words. They were packing for tomorrow, his mother delighted by the surprise getaway, blind to the danger sitting beside her on the edge of the bed, helping her fold sweaters and count out pairs of socks. In the room next to his, Madeline slept the unnatural sleep of whatever drug Richard had given her at the doctor's office. Her small body processing chemicals it should never have encountered. Lucas had checked on her after dinner, had sat by her bed and whispered promises he wasn't sure he could keep. "I'll protect you. I won't let him hurt you. We'll be okay." Now, as midnight approached, he got out of bed and padded silently to his bedroom door, pressing his ear against it to listen for any sound from the hallway. Hearing nothing, he turned the knob carefully and peered out. The house was dark and quiet, the only light coming from beneath his mother's door at the end of the hall. Moving with deliberate slowness to avoid any creaking floorboards, Lucas made his way to the staircase and descended to the first floor. The kitchen was his destination, specifically, the landline phone mounted on the wall beside the refrigerator. Richard had accidentally broken Lucas's emergency cell phone weeks ago, and his mother hadn't replaced it yet, claiming money was tight despite Richard's apparently comfortable income. The kitchen was bathed in the dim blue light of the microwave clock, the shadows deep in the corners. Lucas crossed to the phone and lifted the receiver from its cradle, pressing it to his ear. Silence. No dial tone. He pressed the hook switch repeatedly, his heart sinking. The line was dead, or more likely disconnected. Another of Richard's precautions, like breaking Lucas's cell phone. Replacing the receiver, Lucas stood in the dark kitchen, weighing his options. He could try to wake his mother to tell her everything, but Richard would be there beside her. He could attempt to leave the house, to find a neighbor who might help, but Richard had installed a new security system 3 months ago, one that chimed whenever a door or window opened. His gaze fell on his mother's purse, sitting on the counter where she'd left it when they came home. Her cell phone would be inside. If he could get it, make a call. As he reached for the purse, a floorboard creaked behind him. Lucas froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. Midnight snack, buddy? Richard stood in the kitchen doorway, dressed in sweatpants and a t-shirt, his hair mussed as if he'd been sleeping. But his eyes were alert, watchful. I was thirsty, Lucas managed, his mouth dry with fear. Richard smiled, crossing to the cabinet and taking down a glass. Let me get that for you. He filled it with water from the tap and held it out. You know, you really should try to sleep. We have an early start tomorrow. Lucas took the glass, careful not to let their fingers touch. Thanks. Your mom is really excited about this trip. Richard leaned against the counter, blocking access to his mother's purse. She deserves a break, don't you think? She works so hard. Yes, Lucas agreed, sipping the water slowly, trying to appear calm while his mind raced. I want us to be a real family, Lucas. I want you to trust me the way your mom does. Richard's voice was gentle, reasonable. I know it's been hard for you, adjusting to having a new father figure, but I'm not going anywhere. The sooner you accept that, the happier we'll all be. Lucas nodded, not trusting himself to speak. Good boy. Now back to bed. Richard gestured toward the stairs. And Lucas? Let's stay in our room for the rest of the night. Shall we? No more wandering around. It's not safe for a young boy to be up alone in the dark. You never know what might happen. The threat was thinly veiled, but unmistakable. Lucas finished his water and placed the glass in the sink, then headed for the stairs with Richard following close behind. At the top, Richard placed a hand on his shoulder, steering him toward his bedroom. Sleep tight, buddy, he said as Lucas crossed the threshold. Big day tomorrow. The door closed behind him with a soft click, followed by another sound that made Lucas's blood run cold. The unmistakable snap of a lock being engaged from the outside. A new addition, something Richard must have installed recently, preparing for this moment. Lucas was trapped in his room, separated from his sister by a hallway that might as well have been a mile wide, unable to call for help or warn his mother about the danger sleeping beside her. As he stood in the darkness, his initial panic gave way to a cold, clear understanding. No one was coming to save them. No adult would suddenly realize what was happening and intervene. If Madeline and his mother were to be protected, it would have to be by him. A 9-year-old boy with nothing but his wits and determination standing between his family and a man who made other families disappear. Lucas Mitchell was afraid. More afraid than he had ever been in his life. But beneath the fear, something else was growing. A hard, bright spark of resolve that would not be extinguished. Richard had underestimated him, had dismissed him as just a child, a nuisance to be managed, an obstacle to be overcome. That was his mistake, because Lucas was not just any child. He was his sister's protector, his mother's son, and he would not let them disappear like Marcy and Tommy Sanders. Tomorrow, when they left for the lake house, Richard would be watching him closely, would be expecting him to try something, to resist or call for help. But Lucas had one advantage. Richard thought he had one already. Thought the threat to Madeline was enough to ensure Lucas's cooperation. He didn't understand that the threat was exactly what guaranteed Lucas would never stop fighting, never stop watching, never stop looking for a way to save his sister and expose the monster hiding behind Richard Holloway's friendly smile. In the darkness of his locked room, Lucas Mitchell made a vow. Richard would not win. No matter what it took, no matter the risk, Lucas would find a way to stop him before it was too late. Dawn arrived with a pale, watery light that seeped through Lucas's bedroom window, illuminating the room he had been unable to leave all night. He sat on the edge of his bed, fully dressed, his backpack beside him. Inside were the essentials he had gathered while waiting for morning. A change of clothes, his journal, the $23 saved from his birthday money, a small flashlight, and a photo of himself, Madeline, and their mother taken before Richard had entered their lives. He hadn't slept. How could he, knowing what awaited them? Instead, he had spent the night thinking, planning, trying to anticipate Richard's next moves. The lake house trip was clearly not the family vacation his mother believed it to be. Lucas wasn't sure exactly what Richard intended, but the pattern was clear from his research. Robert Henderson, or whatever his real name was, befriended single mothers with young children, gained their trust, isolated them, and then made them disappear. The sound of the lock turning made Lucas stiffen. He forced his expression into one of sleepy compliance as the door swung open to reveal Richard, already dressed in jeans and a dark blue sweater, his hair neatly combed, his smile firmly in place. "Rise and shine, buddy," he said cheerfully. "Big day today. Your mom's making pancakes for our road trip." Lucas nodded, picking up his backpack. "I'm already packed." Something flickered in Richard's eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or wariness. But his smile never wavered. "Eager to get to the lake, huh? That's the spirit." He stepped back, gesturing for Lucas to precede him into the hallway. "Let's go see if your sister's awake." Madeline's door stood open, but her room was empty, the bed already neatly made. Lucas felt a jolt of panic. "Where is she?" "Downstairs with your mom," Richard assured him, placing a hand on his shoulder to guide him toward the stairs. The touch felt like a brand, heavy with unspoken threat. "She's feeling much better this morning. Amazing what a good night's sleep can do." In the kitchen, the scene was one of domestic tranquility. Elaine stood at the stove flipping pancakes, her dark hair pulled back in a messy bun, still wearing her pajamas and robe. Madeline sat at the table, a glass of orange juice in front of her. Mr. Hoppy the rabbit propped in the chair beside her. She looked better than she had yesterday, her eyes clearer, her color more natural, but there was still a sluggishness to her movements that wasn't normal. "There's my sleepyhead," Elaine said when she spotted Lucas. "I was about to send Richard up to check on you again. Pancakes are almost ready." Lucas managed a smile, crossing to Madeline and ruffling her curls. "Morning, Maddie Bear. Excited about the lake?" She nodded, her expression brightening slightly. "Mommy says we can go swimming if it's warm enough." "That's right," Elaine confirmed, bringing a plate of pancakes to the table. "And Richard packed fishing gear for you too. Won't that be fun?" Lucas met his stepfather's gaze across the kitchen. Richard's smile was pleasant, his posture relaxed, but his eyes held a clear warning. "Play along. Behave, or else." "Sure," Lucas said, sliding into his chair. Fun. Breakfast was a surreal experience. His mother chattered about the activities they might do at the lake, reminiscing about previous trips they had taken when Lucas was younger. Richard contributed enthusiastically, asking questions about the cabin and the surrounding area, making suggestions for hikes they could take, picnics they could have. A perfect stepfather, genuinely interested in family traditions and eager to become part of them. Lucas ate mechanically, observing his mother's animation, her obvious happiness at the prospect of returning to a place she loved with her children and her new husband. She believed they were becoming the family she had always wanted. She had no idea of the danger sitting across from her, complimenting her pancakes and refilling her coffee cup. "Can I bring Mr. Hoppy?" Madeline asked suddenly, holding up her well-worn stuffed rabbit. "Of course you can, Princess," Richard answered before Elaine could. "We wouldn't want to leave him behind." Madeline smiled, the first genuine smile Lucas had seen from her in days, and his heart twisted painfully in his chest. She was just 4, too young to understand the danger they were in, too trusting to see through Richard's facade. Lucas was the only one who knew the truth, the only one who could protect her. After breakfast, there was a flurry of activity as the final items were packed into the car. Richard took charge efficiently, directing which bags went where, ensuring they had snacks and drinks for the journey, checking that nothing essential had been forgotten. Elaine followed his lead happily, grateful for his organizational skills and attention to detail. "I need to use the bathroom before we go," Lucas said as Richard was loading the last of the luggage into the SUV. "Make it quick," Richard replied, his tone light but his gaze sharp. "We want to beat the traffic." In the bathroom, Lucas locked the door and quickly pulled his journal from his backpack. He had been keeping it with him at all times, afraid to leave it hidden in his room where Richard might find it as he had the previous notebook. Now he tore out a page and hastily wrote a note. "My name is Lucas Mitchell. My sister Madeline and I are in danger. My mom's boyfriend, Richard Holloway, is really Robert Henderson, wanted for questioning about missing families in Ohio. Please call the police and tell them to check the Mitchell cabin at Lake Champlain, Vermont. Please hurry." He added his home address and his mother's full name, then folded the note tightly and tucked it into his pocket. It wasn't much of a plan, but it was all he had. If he could find a moment during their journey to pass the note to someone, to create a record of where they were going and who they were with, there might be a chance of help coming before it was too late. When he emerged from the bathroom, Richard was waiting in the hallway, his casual pose belied by the tension in his shoulders. "All set, buddy? Everyone's in the car." Outside, the morning had brightened somewhat, though clouds still hung low in the sky, threatening rain later. Elaine sat in the passenger seat of the SUV, checking something on a map spread across her lap. Madeline was already buckled into her booster seat in the back. Mr. Hoppy clutched to her chest, her eyes heavy with what Lucas suspected was another dose of Richard's medicine. "I gave Madeline a little something for motion sickness," Richard said quietly as he and Lucas approached the car. "She mentioned feeling carsick the last time you made this drive. Your mom agreed it was a good idea." Lucas bit back the angry response that rose to his lips. Getting into an argument now would only put Madeline at greater risk. Instead, he climbed into the back seat beside his sister and took her hand. "You okay, Maddie?" he asked softly. She nodded, her head already drooping against the side of her booster seat. "Sleepy," she murmured. "You can nap during the drive," Lucas told her, squeezing her small fingers gently. "I'll be right here." Richard slid into the driver's seat and started the engine, checking the mirrors before backing out of the driveway. "Everyone ready for an adventure?" he asked, his voice warm with false enthusiasm. "More than ready," Elaine replied, reaching over to touch his arm affectionately. "This was such a wonderful idea, Richard. I still can't believe you arranged everything so quickly." "Anything for my favorite people," Richard said, capturing her hand and bringing it to his lips for a quick kiss. Lucas turned away from the display, focusing instead on Madeline, who had already fallen into an unnatural sleep beside him, her breathing deep and even, her face slack. The sight strengthened his resolve. He would find a way to get help. He would not let Richard hurt his sister or his mother. Whatever it took, whatever the risk, he would protect his family. The drive to Lake Champlain normally took about 3 hours from Oak Ridge. They would head north through Massachusetts and into Vermont, following increasingly smaller roads until they reached the eastern shore of the lake. The cabin was located at the end of a dirt road, nestled in a stand of pine trees with a small private dock extending into the water. Lucas had always loved it there. The cool, clear water, the trees whispering in the breeze, the stars so much brighter at night than they ever were in town. Now the thought of its isolation filled him with dread. Once they arrived, they would be cut off from potential help. His window of opportunity was during this journey, when they would need to stop for gas, for restrooms, for the inevitable checkpoints of travel that would bring them into contact with other people. As they hit the highway, Lucas kept his eyes fixed on the passing landscape, watching for service stations, rest areas, any place where there might be people who could help. Richard seemed to sense his intention. Whenever they did stop, he insisted that Lucas remain in the car with the sleeping Madeline while he and Elaine went inside. When they pulled into a gas station about an hour into their journey, Richard took the unusual step of pumping the gas himself, though the station was full service. "Just stretching my legs," he explained to the attendant with a friendly smile. "Been driving a while." The attendant, a young man with a name tag reading Tyler, nodded disinterestedly and glanced at the car, his gaze passing over Lucas and Madeline in the back seat without really seeing them. Lucas considered knocking on the window, trying to get his attention, but Richard never moved far enough away to make it safe to try. Back on the road, with Madeline still sleeping beside him and his mother and Richard chatting quietly in the front seats, Lucas felt a growing sense of desperation. They were getting closer to the lake, closer to the isolated cabin where Richard would have complete control over them. He needed to act, and soon. "Mom," he said, leaning forward between the front seats. "I really need to use the bathroom." Elaine glanced back at him. "Can you hold it, honey? We're making good time, and I'd rather not stop again if we don't have to." "It's an emergency," Lucas insisted, injecting urgency into his voice. "Please." Richard's eyes met his in the rearview mirror, hard and assessing. "There's a rest area about 10 miles ahead," he said after a moment. "We can stop there." The rest area, when they reached it, was a simple affair. A small building housing restrooms and vending machines, a few picnic tables scattered across a patch of grass, a bulletin board with local attractions and a map of the region. Richard pulled into a parking space and turned off the engine. "I'll take Lucas," he said to Elaine. "Why don't you stay with Madeline? She's sleeping so peacefully, it would be a shame to wake her." Elaine nodded, pulling out her phone. "I'll check my messages. The reception gets spotty once we're closer to the lake." Lucas felt Richard's hand close around his upper arm as they walked toward the restroom building, the grip just shy of painful. "I know what you're thinking, buddy," Richard said conversationally, smiling and nodding at an elderly couple who passed them on the sidewalk. "But it's not going to work. You're going to go into the restroom, do what you need to do, and come right back out. No talking to strangers, no leaving notes, no funny business. Because if you do—" He paused, his smile never faltering. "Well, let's just say Madeline might need a larger dose of her medicine than is strictly safe. Do you understand?" Lucas felt cold despite the mild spring day. "I understand. Good boy. I'll be right outside the door." Richard released his arm as they reached the restroom entrance. "Don't make me come in after you." Inside, the restroom was empty save for a middle-aged man washing his hands at one of the sinks. Lucas hesitated, his hand moving toward the pocket where he had hidden his note. The man glanced at him briefly in the mirror, then reached for a paper towel. This was his chance, perhaps his only chance. But Richard was just outside the door, probably watching through the small window to make sure Lucas didn't try anything. And Madeline was in the car, unconscious from whatever drug Richard had given her, completely vulnerable. The man finished drying his hands and headed for the door, giving Lucas a distracted nod as he passed. Lucas watched him go, the note burning a hole in his pocket, his opportunity slipping away. He used the facilities quickly, his mind racing. There had to be another way, some other opportunity to get help. But as he washed his hands, staring at his reflection in the spotted mirror, a small, pale boy with shadows under his eyes and fear etched into every line of his face. He couldn't see one. Richard was waiting when he emerged, exactly as promised. "All set? Let's get back on the road." In the car, Madeline was beginning to stir, her eyelids fluttering as she fought her way back to consciousness. Lucas took her hand again, squeezing gently. "Hey, Maddie Bear, we're almost to the lake." She blinked at him groggily. "Lucas? I don't feel good." Richard glanced sharply at them in the rearview mirror as he pulled out of the rest area parking lot. "What's wrong, princess?" Tummy still upset from the car ride. Madeline shook her head, a small whimper escaping her. "Hurts?" she mumbled, pressing a hand to her forehead. "Head hurts." Alarm shot through Lucas. This was different from Madeline's usual lethargy after taking Richard's medicine. Her face was flushed, her skin hot to the touch when Lucas placed a hand on her cheek. "Mom," he said urgently. "Madeline's burning up. I think she has a fever." Elaine turned in her seat, concern creasing her brow. "Let me see, honey." She reached back to feel Madeline's forehead, her frown deepening. "She does feel warm." "Richard, do we have any children's Tylenol in the first aid kit?" "I'm not sure," Richard replied, his tone casual though his knuckles had whitened on the steering wheel. "We can check when we get to the cabin. It's not much further." "She's really hot," Lucas insisted, watching as Madeline's eyes slipped closed again, her breathing becoming more rapid. "I think she needs a doctor." "Don't be dramatic, Lucas," Richard said sharply. "It's probably just a little bug. Kids get fevers all the time." But Elaine was looking increasingly concerned. "She does seem pretty uncomfortable, Richard. Maybe we should find an urgent care or a pharmacy, at least get some fever reducer." Richard's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly, but he nodded. "Of course, if you think that's best. There's a small town about 15 minutes ahead. They should have a pharmacy." The town, when they reached it, was little more than a main street with a handful of shops, a diner, and, thankfully, a small pharmacy. Richard pulled into a parking space in front of it and turned to Elaine. "Why don't you run in and get some children's Tylenol? I'll stay with the kids." But Elaine was already unbuckling her seatbelt. "I want to get a good look at her in the daylight. It might not just be a fever. Remember that rash she had last summer that turned out to be an allergic reaction?" Lucas could see the calculations running behind Richard's eyes. The risk of letting Elaine take Madeline into a public place versus the suspicion that would arise if he argued too forcefully against it. After a moment, he nodded. "You're right. Better safe than sorry. Lucas and I will wait here." Lucas felt his heart sink as his mother opened the back door and unbuckled Madeline from her booster seat, lifting her into her arms. "We'll be right back," she promised, pressing a kiss to Madeline's forehead. As they disappeared into the pharmacy, Richard turned to look at Lucas, his pleasant mask slipping to reveal the cold anger beneath. "Don't get any ideas, buddy. Your mother and sister will be back in a few minutes, and then we're getting to the cabin. No more delays." Lucas met his gaze steadily. "Madeline is really sick. What did you give her?" Richard's eyebrows rose in mock innocence. "Just a little something to help with motion sickness, like I told you. Some children are more sensitive than others. It's not my fault if she's having a reaction." "You've been drugging her for weeks," Lucas said, his voice low but steady. "I've been watching, documenting everything. Even if you found my notebook, there are other people who know what you've been doing." It was a bluff, but Richard's expression flickered with uncertainty. "You're 9 years old, Lucas. Who exactly do you think would believe you over me?" "Mrs. Winters, my teacher. She knows something's wrong. And Ms. Abernathy at the library. And the police in Columbus who are looking for you, for Robert Henderson. The man who made Marcy and Tommy Sanders disappear." Richard moved so quickly that Lucas didn't have time to react. One moment he was in the driver's seat, the next he was twisted around, his hand closing around Lucas's throat, not squeezing but holding, a clear threat. "You think you're so smart," Richard hissed, all pretense gone now. "But you have no idea what you're dealing with. No idea at all. Your precious notebook, your little investigation. It's nothing. When we get to the cabin, you and I are going to have a serious conversation about respect and obedience. And if you breathe one word to your mother about any of this, I'll make sure Madeline never wakes up from her next nap. Do I make myself clear?" Lucas couldn't speak, could barely breathe with Richard's hand at his throat. He managed a small nod, and Richard released him, turning back to face the front just as the pharmacy door opened and Elaine emerged with Madeline in her arms. They didn't have children's Tylenol, but the pharmacist recommended this, she said as she settled Madeline back into her booster seat. It's a liquid ibuprofen that should bring down her fever. He said to give her 1 dose now and another in 6 hours if she still feels warm. Richard took the small bottle, examining the label. Perfect. You're such a good mom. Always knowing exactly what to do. Elaine smiled tiredly, buckling Madeline in. I'm just worried about her. She's never had a fever come on so suddenly before. Kids, Richard said with a sympathetic shake of his head. Always keeping us on our toes. He measured out a dose of the medication and held it to Madeline's lips. Here you go, princess. This will make you feel better. Lucas watched helplessly as his sister swallowed the medicine, on top of whatever else Richard had already given her. The pharmacist wouldn't have known about that, wouldn't have been able to warn about potential interactions. He prayed it wouldn't make things worse. Back on the road, the atmosphere in the car had shifted. Elaine kept turning to check on Madeline, her earlier excitement about the trip replaced by maternal concern. Richard drove in silence, his earlier cheerful facade notably absent, his focus entirely on the road ahead. Lucas kept his hand in Madeline's, monitoring her breathing, her temperature, every small shift in her condition. The fever seemed to be holding steady, not getting worse, but not improving either. Her sleep was fitful now, punctuated by small whimpers and restless movements. When they finally turned onto the dirt road leading to the cabin, Lucas felt a wave of dread wash over him. The towering pines closed in on either side, shutting out much of the daylight, creating a tunnel of dappled shadows that seemed to stretch endlessly ahead. He remembered how magical this approach had seemed when he was younger, like entering a secret world, a special place just for their family. Now it felt like the entrance to a trap, each bump and turn of the road taking them further from safety, deeper into Richard's carefully orchestrated plan. The cabin appeared suddenly around a bend, a sturdy structure of logs and stone with a broad porch overlooking the lake, which sparkled in the distance beyond a sloping lawn. It looked exactly as Lucas remembered it, peaceful and welcoming, completely at odds with the danger he knew awaited them inside. Richard pulled up in front of the porch and cut the engine. "Home sweet home," he announced, some of his earlier good humor seemingly restored now that they had reached their destination. "Let's get unpacked and settled in. Then maybe we can take a walk down to the dock before dinner." Elaine was already unbuckling her seatbelt. "I'm going to get Madeline inside first. She needs to lie down properly, maybe have a cool bath to help with the fever." "Of course," Richard agreed smoothly. "I'll bring in the bags. Lucas can help me. Can't you, buddy?" It wasn't a question. Lucas nodded, watching as his mother lifted Madeline from her booster seat and carried her toward the cabin. Richard produced a key from his pocket and handed it to Elaine, who unlocked the door and disappeared inside with Madeline. The moment they were alone, Richard turned to Lucas, his expression cold. "One word to your mother, one hint about your ridiculous theories, and things will get very bad very quickly. Do you understand me?" Lucas understood all too well. He nodded silently and reached for one of the smaller bags in the back of the SUV. "Good boy." Richard's smile returned, sharp and empty. "This is going to be a wonderful family vacation. The first of many, I'm sure. Now let's get these bags inside before your mother wonders what's keeping us." Inside, the cabin smelled of pine and the faint mustiness of a place closed up for the winter. Lucas had always loved the main room with its high ceiling, stone fireplace, and windows overlooking the lake. Now he scanned it quickly, noting exits, possible hiding places, anything that might help in the desperate plan forming in his mind. Elaine had taken Madeline to one of the 2 bedrooms, the smaller one with twin beds where Lucas and his sister would sleep. He could hear water running in the adjoining bathroom, his mother's voice murmuring soothing words. Richard set down the bags he was carrying and surveyed the cabin with the air of a man assessing a new acquisition. "Nice place," he commented. "Isolated. Peaceful. Just what we all need, don't you think?" Lucas said nothing, depositing his own bag near the door and turning to go back for more. Richard caught his arm, his fingers digging in painfully. "I asked you a question, Lucas." "Yes," Lucas said flatly. "It's nice. Richard smiled, releasing him. That's better. We're going to work on your attitude while we're here. By the time we leave, you're going to be a model son. You'll see. The threat hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Lucas turned away and headed back to the car, his mind racing. He had no illusions about what Richard planned. This vacation was a test run, to see if he could control them completely, away from the eyes of neighbors and teachers and friends. If it worked, the next trip would be further, to somewhere no one knew them, somewhere they might never be found. Like Marcy and Tommy Sanders. Like the other families Robert Henderson had made disappear. By the time the car was unloaded and the bags distributed to the appropriate rooms, the afternoon was well advanced. Madeline slept fitfully in one of the twin beds, her fever still present but not dangerously high according to Elaine, who had changed her into light pajamas and placed a cool cloth on her forehead. The ibuprofen seems to be helping a little, she told Lucas, who had come to check on his sister. But I think she's going to need to rest tonight rather than join us for dinner. Poor little thing. I'll stay with her, Lucas offered immediately. Elaine smiled, brushing his hair back from his forehead. That's very sweet, but you've been cooped up in the car all day. Why don't you go explore a bit while I get dinner started? Just don't go near the water without an adult. Remember the rule. It was an unexpected opportunity, a chance to be outside, away from Richard's watchful eye, even if just for a short time. Okay, Lucas agreed. I'll just go down to the dock and back. In the main room, Richard was building a fire in the fireplace, arranging logs with methodical precision. He looked up as Lucas emerged from the bedroom. How's the patient? Still feverish, Lucas replied cautiously. Mom says she needs to rest. Richard nodded, striking a match and holding it to the kindling. Probably for the best. A good night's sleep will set her right. Mom said I could go down to the dock for a bit. Lucas watched Richard carefully, alert for any sign of suspicion or refusal. But Richard merely glanced at his watch. Be back in 30 minutes. It'll be dinner time then. The implicit threat was clear, but Lucas nodded and headed for the door before Richard could change his mind. Outside, the late afternoon sun slanted through the pines, casting long shadows across the lawn that sloped down to the water. The air was cool and fresh, scented with pine and the distinctive mineral tang of the lake. Lucas walked slowly toward the dock, his mind working furiously. 30 minutes wasn't much time, but it was something. The nearest neighbor was a mile away, too far to reach on foot before Richard would come looking for him. There was no phone in the cabin, and cell service was notoriously spotty in this area. The boat that had been kept in a small boathouse beside the dock had been sold after his father left, his mother unable to maintain it on her own. As he reached the dock, Lucas sat down on the weathered planks, dangling his feet above the clear water. From here, he could see a portion of the shoreline curving away to the north, where other cabins and houses were scattered among the trees. The closest was just visible. A green roof peeking through the pines, smoke rising from a chimney. Signs of life. People who might help if he could reach them. But how? Richard would be watching him closely now, especially after the incident in the car. He wouldn't get another chance to be alone outside like this. Unless Lucas stood up abruptly, a plan forming in his mind. It was dangerous, desperate even, but it might be their only chance. He would need to wait until night, until his mother and Richard were asleep. Then he would take Madeline and try to reach the neighboring cabin. Not by the road, which would be the first place Richard would look, but by the lake shore, keeping to the trees for cover. It was risky. Madeline was sick, the terrain was rough, and the darkness would make travel difficult. But the alternative, remaining under Richard's control, waiting for whatever he had planned, was unthinkable. Decision made, Lucas turned back toward the cabin, his steps lighter despite the weight of what lay ahead. He had a plan. It wasn't much, but it was something. A chance. The evening passed in a haze of forced normalcy. Dinner was simple. Pasta with sauce from a jar, garlic bread, a salad, eaten at the small kitchen table with Madeline's absence like a shadow hanging over them. Elaine checked on her frequently, reporting that her fever seemed to be coming down, that she was sleeping more peacefully. Lucas wondered how much of that was due to the ibuprofen and how much to whatever Richard had given her earlier. After dinner, Richard suggested a game of Scrabble, producing the board from a cupboard where the cabin's small collection of games and puzzles was stored. "Family tradition, right?" he said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. They played for an hour, Richard keeping up a steady stream of cheerful conversation, asking Elaine about her memories of previous trips to the lake, making plans for activities they could do the next day if Madeline was feeling better. The perfect stepfather, thoughtful and engaged. Not a hint of the man who had threatened Lucas in the car visible in his behavior. By 9 o'clock, Elaine was yawning. "I think I need to turn in," she said, standing up from the game. "It's been a long day, and I want to check on Madeline once more before I sleep." "I'll be in soon," Richard promised, leaning up to kiss her. "Just going to clean up here and bank the fire for the night." Lucas followed his mother into the bedroom he would share with Madeline, changing quickly into pajamas before she could suggest he do so. Part of his plan required letting her see him ready for bed, creating the impression that he would be sleeping soundly through the night. Madeline was still asleep, her breathing deep and even, her skin cooler to the touch when Elaine laid a hand on her forehead. "The fever's definitely going down," she said with relief. "She should be feeling much better by morning." "That's good," Lucas said, climbing into the other twin bed. "Night, Mom." Elaine bent to kiss his forehead. "Night, sweetheart. Sleep well." After she left, closing the door softly behind her, Lucas lay still, listening to the sounds of the cabin settling around him. The creak of floorboards as Richard moved about in the main room. The rustle of wind in the pines outside. The soft lapping of water against the shore in the distance. He waited, counting minutes in his head, forcing himself to remain patient. It was crucial that Richard and his mother be deeply asleep before he made his move. 10 o'clock came and went. 11. By midnight, the cabin was silent save for the occasional pop from the dying embers in the fireplace. Silently, Lucas slipped out of bed, fully clothed beneath the covers. He had planned this carefully while sitting on the dock, had changed back into his clothes while his mother was checking on Madeline in the bathroom, had placed his shoes beneath the bed for easy access, had tucked his small flashlight into his pocket along with the note he had written, now updated with their location at the lake. Moving with deliberate slowness to avoid any creaking floorboards, Lucas crossed to Madeline's bed and gently shook her shoulder. "Maddie," he whispered, barely audible. "Maddie Bear, wake up." She stirred, her eyes opening groggily. "Lucas?" she murmured. "Shoo!" he cautioned, placing a finger to his lips. "We have to be very quiet, like a game, okay? We're going on a little adventure, but it's a secret." Madeline blinked at him, confusion evident in her small face, but she nodded. At 4, she was still young enough to be intrigued by the idea of a secret adventure, especially one proposed by her big brother, whom she trusted implicitly. "My head still hurts," she whispered as Lucas helped her sit up. "I know. We're going to get you some more medicine, but we have to go somewhere else to get it. That's part of the adventure." He reached for her slippers, easier and quieter than trying to put on her shoes, and helped her into her jacket, which had been draped over the foot of the bed. "What about Mr. Hoppy?" Madeline asked, reaching for her stuffed rabbit. "He can come too," Lucas assured her, tucking the well-worn toy under her arm. "Now remember, we have to be super quiet. No talking until I say it's okay. Can you do that?" Madeline nodded solemnly, her blue eyes wide in the darkness. Lucas took her hand and led her to the bedroom door, easing it open inch by inch, wincing at the small squeak from one of the hinges. The main room lay in darkness beyond, illuminated only by the faint red glow from the banked fire and the silvery wash of moonlight through the windows. Lucas paused, listening intently for any sound from the second bedroom where his mother and Richard slept. Hearing nothing, he guided Madeline into the main room, keeping to the edges where the floorboards were less likely to creak. The front door was their goal, just 20 feet away across the open floor, its deadbolt likely engaged for the night. They had made it halfway across the room when a floorboard creaked loudly beneath Lucas's foot. He froze, Madeline's hand clutched tightly in his, hardly daring to breathe as he strained to hear any response from the other bedroom. For a long moment, there was nothing. Then came the unmistakable sound of movement, a rustling of blankets, a murmured question in his mother's voice, Richard's deeper tones in response. Abandoning caution for speed, Lucas pulled Madeline toward the door, reaching for the deadbolt with his free hand. It turned easily, but the door stuck slightly in its frame, requiring a harder tug than he had anticipated. As it swung open, admitting a gust of cool night air, a light flicked on in the main room. "Lucas? What on earth are you doing?" His mother's voice, thick with sleep but rapidly sharpening with alarm. Lucas didn't stop to answer. Still gripping Madeline's hand, he pulled her through the doorway onto the porch, her slippered feet stumbling on the rough boards. "Lucas Mitchell, stop right there." His mother again, fully awake now, her tone shifting from confusion to anger. But it was another voice that sent ice through Lucas's veins. Richard's voice, low and dangerous, no longer maintaining any pretense of the concerned stepfather. "Get back here, right now." Lucas ran, half dragging Madeline down the porch steps and across the moonlit lawn toward the lake. He could hear footsteps behind them. Richard, pursuing, no longer bothering to hide the rage that had always simmered beneath his friendly facade. "Lucas, stop!" Richard bellowed, his voice echoing across the moonlit lawn. "You don't know what you're doing." Madeline was struggling to keep up, her illness making her clumsy and slow. Lucas could hear her labored breathing, feel the drag of her weight against his hand. When she stumbled on a tree root, nearly falling, he made a split-second decision and scooped her into his arms. She was heavier than he expected, her small body a solid weight against his chest, but fear and determination lent him strength he didn't know he possessed. "Lucas!" His mother's voice now, frantic and confused. "What are you doing? Come back!" He didn't look back, couldn't afford to. The shoreline was just ahead, a narrow strip of pebbly beach that curved around the lake. If they could reach it, they could follow it to the neighboring cabin, the one with the green roof and the chimney smoke he had seen earlier. People who might help them, who might believe him about Richard. Behind them, the sounds of pursuit grew louder. Richard was gaining on them, his longer strides eating up the distance. Lucas veered off the lawn into the trees that separated their property from the shoreline, hoping the uneven terrain and the darkness would slow their pursuer. "You're going to hurt her, Lucas," Richard called, his voice suddenly shifting to one of concern. "Madeline is sick. She needs to be in bed." The manipulation was so transparent that Lucas almost laughed despite the terror pounding through his veins. He clutched Madeline tighter, adjusting her weight as he navigated the slope that led down to the water. Her head lolled against his shoulder, her breathing worryingly shallow. "Lucas," she whispered, "I don't feel good." "I know, Maddie Bear," he panted. "Just a little further. We're going to get help." The beach appeared before them, silver gray in the moonlight. Lucas turned north, toward where he had seen the neighboring cabin, his shoes sliding on the wet pebbles. Madeline had grown heavier with each step, her small body a dead weight in his aching arms. His muscles screamed in protest, but he forced himself to continue, one foot in front of the other, away from Richard, toward potential safety. Behind them, the crashing sounds of pursuit suddenly stopped. Lucas risked a glance over his shoulder and saw Richard standing at the edge of the trees, his figure silhouetted against the moonlit lawn, watching them. The sight sent a fresh wave of terror through Lucas. Why had Richard stopped? What was he planning? The answer came a moment later when a shout echoed across the water. "Help! My children! Someone help!" It was Richard's voice, but raised to a pitch of panic Lucas had never heard before. He was calling for help, making it sound as if Lucas and Madeline were in danger, as if he was the concerned parent trying to save them. "My son has taken my daughter," Richard continued, his voice carrying clearly in the still night air. "She's sick. She needs her medication. Please, if anyone can hear me, help." Lucas felt sick with the realization of what Richard was doing, turning the situation against him, making it seem as if Lucas was the danger, the unstable one. Who would believe a 9-year-old boy over a distraught stepfather? Lucas, please. His mother's voice now, closer than he had realized. She had followed them down to the beach and stood a few yards away, her face pale in the moonlight, her expression a mixture of confusion and fear. What's happening? Why are you running away with Madeline? This was his chance, perhaps his only chance, to make his mother understand. Still holding Madeline, who had gone frighteningly still in his arms, Lucas turned to face Elaine. Mom, Richard isn't who you think he is, he said, the words tumbling out in a desperate rush. His real name is Robert Henderson. He's wanted by the police in Ohio. He makes families disappear. A woman named Marcy Sanders and her little boy Tommy. They went missing after they met him. He's been drugging Madeline, making her sick on purpose. The medicine he gives her, it's not for her health. He's dangerous, Mom. We have to get away from him. Elaine stared at him, her eyes wide with shock. Lucas, that's crazy. Where did you get such ideas? Richard loves us. He's been nothing but good to us. It's true, Lucas insisted, feeling Madeline stir weakly in his arms. I found photos in his filing cabinet, Marcy and Tommy Sanders. I looked them up at the library. They're missing and the police think Robert had something to do with it. Please, Mom, you have to believe me. For a moment, just a moment, something flickered in his mother's eyes. Doubt. The first seed of doubt. She looked from Lucas to Richard, who stood at the edge of the trees, his face arranged in an expression of parental concern. Elaine, Richard called, his voice gentle now persuasive. Lucas is confused. He's been making up stories about me for weeks. You know this, he's having trouble adjusting, that's all. Let me help him bring Madeline back to the cabin. She needs her medication. What medication? Lucas demanded, turning to face Richard fully now. Tell her, Richard. Tell her what you've been giving Madeline. Tell her why she's always so tired. Why she gets sick after you give her juice. Why she has bruises she can't explain. Richard began walking toward them, his hands raised in a placating gesture. Lucas, buddy, you're upset. I understand. It's been hard for you having a new father figure. But making up these stories, taking your sister in the middle of the night, this isn't the answer. Let me help you. He was almost upon them now, his tall figure blocking the moonlight, casting Lucas and Madeline into shadow. Lucas took a step backward, his feet slipping on the wet stones of the beach, Madeline a deadweight in his trembling arms. Stay away from us, he warned, his voice breaking with fear and exhaustion. Lucas, his mother said, moving closer, her hand outstretched. Give Madeline to me. She needs to be in bed. We can talk about all this in the morning. No, Lucas cried, backing away further. You don't understand. He's going to hurt us. He's going to make us disappear like the others. Richard's face twisted with impatience, the mask slipping for just an instant before he controlled himself. Elaine, he's hysterical. Let me handle this. He took another step toward Lucas. Give me your sister, Lucas. Now. No. Lucas took another step backward, his heel meeting empty air as the shoreline dropped off into deeper water. He stumbled, fighting to maintain his balance with Madeline's weight in his arms. In that moment of vulnerability, Richard lunged forward, grabbing for Madeline. His fingers closed around her arm, pulling her from Lucas's grasp. She cried out, a thin, pained sound that cut through the night, and something in Lucas snapped. With a strength born of pure desperation, he yanked Madeline back, twisting away from Richard's grip. But the momentum sent him staggering backward into the water, Madeline still clutched to his chest. They fell with a splash, the lake's cold embrace shocking after the warm night air. Lucas surfaced quickly, gasping, still holding Madeline, whose eyes had flown open at the shock of the cold water. She began to cry, her small body shivering violently against his. Look what you've done, Richard shouted, wading into the shallows toward them. Give her to me before you drown her, you stupid boy. But Lucas could see something in Richard's eyes now that his mother, standing on the shore, Could not. A calculation, a deadly intent. If Richard got his hands on them now, in the water where accidents happen so easily. "Mom!" Lucas called, backing further into the lake, the water now at his chest, supporting Madeline so her head stayed well above the surface. "Nam, please, look in his study at home. Look for the photos. Look for the pill bottles. Ask Mrs. Winters at school. She knows something's wrong. Please, you have to believe me." Elaine stood frozen on the shore, her gaze darting between her son and her husband, indecision written across her features. "Richard," she said finally, her voice shaking. "What photos is he talking about? What pills?" Richard didn't look at her, his attention fixed entirely on Lucas and Madeline in the water. "He's making it up, Elaine. You know how imaginative he is." He took another step into the lake, water swirling around his thighs. "Lucas, this has gone far enough. You're scaring your sister. Bring her to shore right now." "No!" Lucas's teeth were chattering from the cold, but his resolve remained firm. "Stay back. I mean it." "Or what?" Richard asked, his voice dropping to a dangerous murmur that only Lucas could hear. "What exactly do you think you're going to do, buddy? I'm bigger, stronger, and smarter than you. And once I have Madeline, your mother will believe whatever I tell her. About how you had some kind of breakdown. About how you put your sister in danger. About how you might need special care in a place where they know how to deal with troubled children." He took another step closer, water now at his waist. Lucas backed away further, careful to keep Madeline's head above water, feeling the lake bottom begin to slope more steeply beneath his feet. "Richard, stop!" Elaine called from the shore, her voice taking on a new note of alarm. "Lucas can't swim well. You're driving them into deeper water." Lucas saw the moment Richard made his decision, saw it in the cold calculation of his eyes, in the slight tensing of his body before he lunged. Time seemed to slow as Richard surged through the water toward them, his hands outstretched, his face a mask of predatory intent. In that frozen moment, Lucas made his own decision. With the last of his strength, he tossed Madeline toward the shore, toward his mother, the motion sending him backward into deeper water. Madeline hit the shallows with a splash, sputtering and crying but safe from the immediate threat Richard posed. Richard, caught off guard by the unexpected move, hesitated for a crucial second, torn between pursuing Lucas and grabbing Madeline. That second was all Elaine needed to wade into the shallows and scoop up her daughter, pulling her to the safety of the shore. "Mom!" Lucas called, treading water now, his clothes heavy and dragging him down. "Take Madeline and run. Go to the neighbors. Call the police." Elaine stood on the shore, clutching Madeline to her chest, her face a study in conflicting emotions. "Lucas, go!" he shouted, as Richard turned back toward him, fury etched into every line of his face. "You little bastard," Richard snarled, advancing through the water. "You think you've won? You think anyone will believe your stories? Your mother loves me. She trusts me. All I have to do is tell her you had some kind of episode, that you've been making things up for attention. And after your little stunt tonight, who do you think she'll believe?" Lucas continued to tread water, struggling against the weight of his sodden clothes, watching in a mixture of relief and terror as his mother backed away up the beach, Madeline in her arms. She hadn't run to the neighbors as he'd begged her to do, but at least she was keeping Madeline away from Richard for the moment. "She'll believe me," Lucas said, though his voice shook with cold and fear. "Once she thinks about it, really thinks, she'll see I'm telling the truth. About the medicine. About how you've been acting. About everything." Richard lunged suddenly, his arm shooting out to grab Lucas's ankle beneath the water, yanking him forward into the shallows where he could get a better grip. Lucas thrashed wildly, kicking with his free leg, but Richard's strength was overwhelming. He dragged Lucas closer, one hand moving to grab the front of his soaking shirt. "Let him go!" Elaine's voice, sharp with a new authority, cut through the night. "Richard, let go of my son right now." Richard froze, his grip still tight on Lucas's shirt, and turned to look at Elaine, who stood on the shore, Madeline balanced on one hip, her free hand clutching something that glinted in the moonlight. Lucas's journal. The one Mrs. Winters had given him, where he had documented everything. Richard's real identity, the pills, Madeline's symptoms, the photos of Marcy and Tommy Sanders. It must have fallen from his pocket during the struggle, washed up on the shore where his mother had found it. "What is this?" Elaine demanded, holding up the journal. "What is all this, Richard? Or should I call you Robert?" Her voice broke on the name, but her stance remained firm. "There are dates, times, details I can check. Is it true? Have you been drugging my daughter?" Richard released Lucas so suddenly that he fell backward into the water with a splash. When he surfaced, gasping, he saw Richard wading toward the shore, his hands raised placatingly, his expression shifting to one of wounded innocence. "Elaine, honey, you can't possibly believe this nonsense," he said, his voice gentle and reasonable. "Lucas has been writing fiction. You know how creative he is. This is just another story. Another attempt to get attention." Elaine took a step backward, keeping the distance between them. "It's very specific for fiction, Richard. Names, dates, pill bottles with scraped-off labels. A woman and boy from Columbus who are missing." Her voice hardened. "Is your name really Robert Henderson?" Richard stopped, water lapping around his knees, his face unreadable in the shifting moonlight. "Elaine, you're being ridiculous. Of course my name is Richard Holloway. I'm your husband. I love you and the children. This," he gestured at the journal, at the situation, "this is all a misunderstanding. Then you won't mind if I call the police to clear it up?" Elaine said, reaching into the pocket of her robe and producing her cell phone. "I'm sure they can help us sort fact from fiction." Something changed in Richard's demeanor. A subtle shift, a tightening of his shoulders, a coldness entering his eyes. "I don't think that's necessary, Elaine. Let's go back to the cabin and discuss this like rational adults." "I'm calling the police," Elaine repeated, more firmly this time. "Stay where you are, Richard." For a long, tense moment, no one moved. Lucas remained in the water, shivering violently now, watching as his mother began to dial with one hand, still holding Madeline with the other. Richard stood in the shallows, his body tense, poised like a predator about to spring. Then, with a suddenness that startled them all, he lunged toward Elaine, reaching for the phone. Elaine screamed and stumbled backward, losing her balance on the uneven pebbles of the beach. As she fell, Madeline slipped from her grasp, landing hard on the stones with a cry of pain. Richard seized the moment of chaos, grabbing the phone from Elaine's hand and hurling it into the lake where it disappeared with a distant splash. Then he turned toward Madeline, reaching for her with an expression that made Lucas's blood run cold. "No!" Lucas shouted, struggling toward the shore, his waterlogged clothes hampering his movements. "Leave her alone." Elaine, recovering from her fall, threw herself between Richard and Madeline, her maternal instinct overriding any fear she might have felt. "Don't touch her," she cried, her voice raw with emotion. "Don't you dare touch my daughter." Richard hesitated, clearly calculating his options. The situation had spiraled beyond his control. Without the phone, Elaine couldn't call for help immediately, but the neighboring cabin was close enough that a determined adult could reach it quickly. And Elaine's suspicions were now fully aroused. The careful facade he had built was crumbling rapidly. "You're making a mistake, Elaine," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "I've done nothing but love you and these children. Nothing but try to build a family with you." "Is your name Richard Holloway?" Elaine demanded, gathering Madeline into her arms and rising to her feet. "Answer me." Richard's face contorted with rage, the mask finally dropping completely. "You ungrateful bitch," he snarled. "After everything I've done for you, given you a father for your children, security, a future, this is how you repay me? By believing the fantasies of a jealous 9-year-old. Lucas had reached the shallows now, his legs barely supporting him as he staggered toward his mother and sister. "It's true," he gasped. "All of it. He's been lying to us from the beginning." Richard's gaze flicked between them, calculating, predatory. Then, with a suddenness that took them all by surprise, he turned and ran. Not toward the cabin but along the shoreline, heading south away from the neighboring property, disappearing into the darkness beyond the reach of the moonlight. For a moment no one moved. The only sounds were their ragged breathing and the gentle lapping of water against the shore. Then Elaine seemed to collect herself, shifting Madeline in her arms and reaching out to pull Lucas against her side. "We need to get to the neighbors," she said, her voice shaking but determined. "Both of you are soaking wet and freezing. Madeline still has a fever. We need help." Lucas looked up at his mother, seeing the new lines of strain around her eyes, the paleness of her face in the moonlight. "You believe me?" he asked, his voice small and uncertain. Elaine looked down at him, tears welling in her eyes. "I believe that something is very wrong, and that you were trying to protect your sister. That's enough for now." She squeezed his shoulder gently. "The rest we'll figure out with the police." Together, they made their way along the shoreline toward the neighboring cabin, its green roof and chimney just visible through the trees. Lucas's legs felt like lead, his clothes heavy with lake water, his body trembling with cold and the aftermath of terror. But Madeline was safe in their mother's arms, and Robert was gone, at least for the moment. They had escaped the immediate danger. But Lucas knew, with a certainty that went bone deep, that this was not over. Richard would not simply disappear into the night, leaving them to tell their story to the police, to expose his true identity, to ruin the life he had so carefully constructed. He would be back, and when he came, he would be more dangerous than ever. As they approached the neighboring cabin, its windows glowing with warm light that spilled onto the lawn, Lucas felt a complex mixture of relief and dread. They had survived the night. They had found their voices in the darkness. But the danger had only just begun. 6 months had passed since that harrowing night at Lake Champlain. The Mitchell family now lived in a small apartment across town, its walls freshly painted in colors Madeline had chosen. Sunshine yellow for the kitchen, sky blue for the bedrooms. October had brought crisp air and trees aflame with color, visible through windows that no longer felt like watchful eyes. Lucas sat on a wooden bench outside Brighton Pharmacy, the same establishment where Ms. Abernathy had once caught him researching Robert Henderson. Today, though, he wasn't running or hiding. He was waiting for his mother, who had taken Madeline inside to speak with Eleanor Phillips, the pharmacist who had become an unexpected ally in the aftermath of that terrible night. The events following their escape from the cabin had unfolded with dizzying speed. The neighbors, an elderly couple named the Wilsons, had welcomed them with blankets and hot tea, had called the police while Lucas recounted his story, shivering but determined to make the adults understand. This time, finally, they had listened. Richard, or Robert Henderson, as the police confirmed he was actually named, had vanished into the night, but his freedom had been short-lived. A state trooper had spotted him 3 days later at a bus station in Burlington, attempting to flee to Canada with a new identity already in progress. The arrest had been front-page news in Oak Ridge, the small town reeling from the revelation that a predator had lived among them, charming and invisible. The evidence, once people began looking, had been overwhelming. The pill bottles in the medicine cabinet contained a powerful sedative never prescribed to either Mitchell child. A search of Henderson's filing cabinet revealed not just photos of Marcy and Tommy Sanders, but documentation on 3 other families who had disappeared after becoming entangled with him under different aliases. Financial records showed he had systematically drained Elaine's savings while isolating her from friends and family. Most damning of all, Henderson's laptop contained detailed plans for their disappearance. A cabin in northern Canada, new identities, a compliant, drugged child who would be easier to control than Lucas had proven to be. "Penny, for your thoughts?" Lucas looked up to find his mother standing before him, Madeline's hand clasped in hers. At 34, Elaine Mitchell looked both older and younger than she had 6 months ago. A few more lines around her eyes, but a straightness to her shoulders that had been missing during her time with Richard, a clarity in her gaze that spoke of hard-won wisdom. "Just thinking," Lucas replied with a small shrug. Elaine sat beside him on the bench, drawing Madeline onto her lap. The little girl looked nothing like the pale, listless child she had been half a year earlier. Her curls bounced with health, her blue eyes clear and bright, her small body wriggling with the perpetual energy of a now healthy 5-year-old. Ms. Eleanor says I'm the bravest girl she knows, Madeline announced, proudly displaying a sticker on the back of her hand. A cartoon lion with the words "Courage Roars" beneath it. She's absolutely right, Elaine agreed, pressing a kiss to the top of her daughter's head. Both my children are the bravest people I know. Her gaze shifted to Lucas, a familiar shadow of regret passing across her features. I should have listened to you sooner. I will never forgive myself for that. It was a conversation they had revisited many times during their weekly family therapy sessions. Elaine's guilt, Lucas's lingering anger, the slow, painful rebuilding of trust between them. Dr. Matthews, their therapist, had helped them find a language for the complex emotions that remained in Richard's wake. Betrayal, fear, relief, grief for the family they had thought they were becoming. You listened when it mattered most, Lucas said quietly, the response familiar but no less true for its repetition. You believed me at the lake. You protected Madeline. A comfortable silence fell between them, broken only by the rustle of autumn leaves skittering across the sidewalk and Madeline's soft humming as she examined her sticker. From where they sat, Lucas could see the town square with its white steepled church, the row of shops along Main Street, the park where he had once taught Madeline to pump her legs on the swing. Oakridge looked the same, but everything had changed. Are you ready for this afternoon? Elaine asked, checking her watch. We don't have to go if you don't want to. Lucas considered the question seriously, as he had been taught to do in his own private therapy sessions with Dr. Wilson. This afternoon referred to the community award ceremony at the town hall, where Lucas was to receive a citation for courage from the mayor. Eleanor Phillips had organized it as part of a new child safety awareness initiative she had launched after learning of Richard's predatory pattern. I think I'm ready, he said finally. Mrs. Winters will be there, right? Front row, Elaine confirmed. And Ms. Abernathy from the library. And Officer Martinez, who took your statement that night. The ceremony would mean standing in front of people, accepting acknowledgement for something Lucas still didn't fully understand. He hadn't felt brave that night at the lake, only desperate and terrified. But Dr. Wilson had explained that courage wasn't about feeling fearless. It was about acting despite your fear, about recognizing when something mattered more than your own safety. Madeline slid from their mother's lap and came to stand in front of Lucas, her small face serious. Will there be cake after? She asked, the question so utterly childlike and normal that Lucas felt a surge of grateful joy. I think so, he answered, tugging gently on one of her curls. Chocolate, probably. Good, she said decisively. I like chocolate best now. Mr. Hoppy does too. The stuffed rabbit in question was clutched in her left hand, worn and beloved, one of the few possessions they had kept from their old life. Lucas sometimes marveled at his sister's resilience. How quickly she had bounced back once the drugs left her system. How readily she embraced their new apartment, their new routines, their new understanding of family as just the three of them, stronger together than they had ever been with Richard's false promises. We should head home to change, Elaine said, standing and brushing invisible lint from her nurse's scrubs. She had switched to day shifts at a different hospital, determined to be more present for her children. The move had meant a pay cut, which in turn had necessitated the smaller apartment, but neither Lucas nor his mother regretted the changes. The ceremony starts at 3. They walked home together through the familiar streets of Oakridge, Madeline skipping ahead and then running back, unable to contain her energy. Lucas watched her, a fierce protectiveness still burning in his chest at the sight of his sister, whole and happy and safe. The trial was still months away. Lucas would have to testify, to face Robert Henderson across a courtroom and tell his story once more. But he wasn't afraid of that anymore. The truth, once spoken, had a power that couldn't be contained or controlled, just as Mrs. Winters had tried to tell him with the gift of that journal so many months ago. At home, Lucas changed into the new dress shirt and slacks his mother had bought for the occasion, combing his hair neatly in the bathroom mirror. The face that looked back at him seemed older. Somehow, not just the natural changes of growing, but something in the eyes, a steadiness that hadn't been there before. In the living room, he found his mother helping Madeline with the buttons of her purple dress, her favorite color still, though now she insisted on selecting her own clothes each morning, a small but significant reclaiming of autonomy that Dr. Matthews had encouraged. "You look very handsome," Elaine told him, her smile warm and genuine. "How are you feeling?" Lucas considered the question, taking stock of the emotions flowing through him. There was anxiety, yes, about standing in front of the town. There was lingering anger toward Richard, toward the system that had failed to catch him earlier, toward the adults who had dismissed his concerns for so long. But beneath those familiar feelings ran something new, a quiet certainty, a knowledge of his own worth and strength that no one could take from him again. "I feel okay," he said simply. "Ready." The town hall was crowded when they arrived, familiar faces turning to smile and nod as the Mitchell family made their way to the reserved seats in the front row. Mrs. Winters was there as promised, elegant in a blue dress, her gray hair arranged in its usual neat bun. She squeezed Lucas's hand wordlessly as he passed, her eyes bright with pride behind her wire-rimmed glasses. Mayor Collins spoke first, his deep voice echoing through the hall as he outlined the new child safety awareness program that would be implemented in Oak Ridge's schools and community centers. Then Eleanor Phillips took the podium, describing in general terms the dangers children might face and the importance of listening, really listening when they tried to tell adults something was wrong. "Today we honor a young man who reminds us all that courage comes in many forms," Eleanor said, her gaze finding Lucas in the front row. "Sometimes the bravest thing we can do is to keep speaking the truth, even when no one seems to be listening." Lucas Mitchell did exactly that, protecting his sister and ultimately his mother from harm through his persistence, his careful observation, and his unwavering love for his family. Lucas felt his mother's hand close around his, a silent support as Eleanor called him to the stage. His legs felt oddly disconnected as he made his way up the steps, facing the sea of familiar faces. His teachers, his neighbors, the police officers who had responded that night at the lake. In recognition of his courage and his role in bringing a dangerous predator to justice, Eleanor continued, the town of Oak Ridge presents Lucas Mitchell with this citation for bravery. The framed certificate she handed him felt unexpectedly heavy. Lucas looked out at the audience, at the faces of people who had known him his whole life but had never really seen him until now. They were applauding for him for what he had done, for the truth he had refused to stop speaking no matter how many times he was dismissed. As he searched the crowd, his gaze caught on Madeline, sitting on their mother's lap, clapping with enthusiastic abandon, her face alight with a joy that 6 months ago had seemed lost forever. In that moment, something shifted in Lucas's chest, a weight lifting, a wound beginning, finally, to heal. The citation, the ceremony, the acknowledgement. None of it could erase what had happened. The nightmares that still sometimes woke him, the wariness around adult men he didn't know, the hypervigilance that Dr. Wilson was helping him learn to manage. These were scars he would carry. But they were not the whole of him. Later, as promised, there was cake, chocolate as Lucas had predicted, served in the community room adjacent to the hall. Lucas sat at a small table with his mother and sister, watching as Madeline meticulously separated the cake from the frosting, eating each component with deliberate enjoyment. "Lucas," she said suddenly, looking up from her methodical deconstruction, "are we safe now?" The question, so direct and yet so complex, caught him off guard. Lucas glanced at his mother, who watched them both with a careful neutrality that told him this was his question to answer. "Yes," he said after a moment, finding that he believed it. "Richard Robert is in jail. He can't hurt us anymore." Madeline considered this, her small face serious. "But you're still scared sometimes. I hear you at night." Lucas felt a flush of embarrassment, but Dr. Wilson's voice echoed in his mind. "Honesty builds trust. Trust heals. Sometimes I have bad dreams," he admitted. "But that doesn't mean we're not safe. It just means my brain is still working through everything that happened." Madeline nodded as if this made perfect sense. "My brain does that too, but not as much anymore." She pushed a glob of frosting toward him, a peace offering. "You can have this. I know you like the frosting best." The simple gesture, His sister's recognition of his preference, her desire to share, brought a lump to Lucas's throat. "Thanks, Matty Bear." As the afternoon wound down, they said their goodbyes to the well-wishers, collected Madeline's coat from the rack by the door, and stepped out into the crisp October evening. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the town square, but unlike the shadows that had once seemed so threatening in their old house, these held no menace. They walked home slowly, Madeline between them, holding both their hands and occasionally demanding to be swung forward in the childhood game of 1, 2, 3, we. Each time, her laughter rang out, clear and bright in the evening air, drowning out the whispers of what might have been, what almost was. At home, as Elaine prepared a simple dinner, Lucas retreated to his room and placed the framed citation on his desk beside a photograph taken a few weeks earlier. The three Mitchells at the park, smiling into the camera, a family reshaped by fire but stronger for having survived it. From a drawer, he retrieved the journal Mrs. Winters had given him so many months ago. Its pages were no longer filled with fearful observations and desperate plans, but with stories. Adventures he wrote for Madeline about brave children who overcame monsters, who found their way home through dark woods, who spoke truth to power and were, eventually, heard. "Lucas!" Madeline's voice called from the kitchen. "Mom says dinner's ready. We're having spaghetti." "Coming!" he called back, running his fingers over the journal's cover one last time before setting it aside. The evening stretched before them, ordinary, peaceful, secure. Dinner together at their small table. Bath time for Madeline with extra bubbles because it was a special day. A story before bed, one of Lucas's own creations about a princess and her brave brother who discovered a magical garden where shadows couldn't follow them. Later, as Lucas prepared for bed himself, Elaine appeared in his doorway, a small box in her hands. "I was going to wait until your birthday next month," she said, "but tonight seems right." She sat on the edge of his bed and handed him the box. "I think you're ready for this." Inside was a cell phone, not a brand new model, but newer than the emergency phone Richard had broken all those months ago. Lucas looked up at his mother, a question in his eyes. "So we can always reach each other," she explained, her voice steady but her eyes bright with unshed tears. "So you never have to feel alone or unheard again." "Thank you," Lucas said, the words inadequate for the trust and understanding the gift represented. Elaine leaned forward to kiss his forehead, a gesture he had once found embarrassing, but now accepted as the comfort it was meant to be. "I'm so proud of you, Lucas. Not just for what you did, but for who you are. Never forget that." After she left, Lucas placed the phone on his bedside table and turned out the light, listening to the familiar sounds of their apartment settling around him. The hum of the refrigerator, the soft whisper of the heating vent, the occasional creak of floorboards as his mother moved through her own nighttime routine. Ordinary sounds, safe sounds, the soundtrack of a life reclaimed. In the darkness, Lucas made a silent promise to himself, to Madeline, to the children whose faces he had seen in those photographs, hidden in Richard's filing cabinet. He would keep writing his stories, would keep speaking truth when it needed to be spoken, would remember always the power of a small voice in the darkness, refusing to be silenced. As sleep began to claim him, Lucas felt a peace he hadn't known in a very long time. They had survived. They had found their way back to light and safety, not because a hero had rescued them, but because they had rescued themselves. A boy, his sister, their mother, finding strength they hadn't known they possessed. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, the ongoing therapy, the preparation for the trial, the continuing work of healing and rebuilding. But for tonight, in this moment, they were together. They were safe. They were heard. And that, Lucas thought as he drifted toward sleep, was everything.